Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 348, Pop Culture and Whatnot, Star Trek versus Star Wars. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Wayland, Dr. Norge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensational Jedi sensei of the Whatnot, Segulin, and the Duke of You Know.
How's it going, eh?
Jim, on this episode, we haven't had a chance to do one of these in about a month and a half. These Pop Culture and Whatnot episodes where we kind of step outside our normal show. And we wanted to do something, as we're getting closer to 350, something big with this concept. You can't get bigger than the concepts of Star Trek and Star Wars. So that's what you and I are talking about. Our background with Star Trek and Star Wars, what we think about the future of Star Trek and Star Wars, where it's at now. So it gets into a very meaty discussion. So hopefully any of you that are fans of both of these franchises, whether you're a newer person to them or, a lifelong fan of them, will find this episode as an enjoyable break from our regular show. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, if you haven't been reading the Star Wars or Star Trek comics that are published by Dark Horse for Star Wars and IDW for Star Trek, DCBService.com is the place to get on board pre-ordering them. Also, they are a Comixology and iVerse Media digital partner. So you can get any of your comics, any of the back issues of your comics included, from those digital stores by clicking on the handy link on our website, going to their websites, and doing your purchases there. Remember that you earn 5% of those purchases towards your DCB Service order, and it doesn't cost you anything more to do that. So please consider going to the DCB Service website anytime you're doing digital purchases, because you want to support. They are a podcast sponsor. They've been doing a great job, not just for our podcast, of many podcasts sponsoring them, so please support them by doing that. Over at InStockTrades.com, the new Star Wars ongoing is not yet, because it hasn't had enough issues yet, is not yet collected in trade. But the Star Trek ongoing is. As a matter of fact, they just released the Star Trek ongoing Volume 4 trade paperback. This one collects the classic Mirror Universe story, but it's a reimagining of it with this current new crew, with all of the changes that have happened due into the film universe. And this is just a great volume. I can't recommend it enough. $17.99 regularly, 30% off, only $12.59. That's a 104-page count book. Remember, InStockTrades.com has a vast array of Star Trek and Star Wars volumes, and orders of $50 or more give you free shipping. So if you want to stock up on some of these things, you're like, hey, you know what, I've been really looking to jump back into one or both of those universes, and I've been looking at a way to do it at a good price point. InStockTrades.com is your source. They have a lot collected in trade paperback and in hardcover from IDW, Dark Horse, and other publishers, so it's a great opportunity to collect any of your Star Trek and Star Wars volumes you've been missing out on. And I want to thank both of those sites for supporting our show. I want to give a very, very quick shout out to friend of the show, Myron Rumsey, and his podcast of Oa. This is from the Blog of Oa website, and I joined him on the most recent episode where we're talking about Green Lantern New Guardians number 18, Red Lanterns number 18, Green Lantern number 19, and Green Lantern Corps number 19. I was really thrilled to be invited to be a part of the show. Myron's been a good friend to our show and has jumped in many times to help us out with our discussions on Green Lantern, so it was nice to be able to return the favor and pop on over to the wonderful podcast of Oa. So please consider checking it out. There's a link in our show notes. There's also a link on our website. So please consider popping to either of those places and checking out Myron's podcast. And it was really a great opportunity to be there. James, what kind of a podcast are we?
Be wary, be warned, and be prepared. Pop Culture and Whatnot, a division of Raging Bullets, is a spoiler podcast. For today's episode, we go in-depth into plot lines, story twists, and whatnot of the Star Trek and Star Wars universe. So release your hate and embrace the dark side of Whatnot, and enjoy the show.
Engage.
Great molecules! They're programming the computers for a chain reaction to blow up that atomic pile!
Jim, it's been a while since we've done one of these episodes, and I wanted to do something that we hadn't done on the show before, but was something that I knew we were both passionate about, but probably in different ways that would be unique and interesting. With all of the stuff going on and all the buzz going on with Star Wars and Star Trek, I figured it'd be great to just have a casual discussion on our history with both franchises, where it's been in our entire life and where we're at with it now. Like, what is our involvement with it? Do we have a preference between the two, or do both fill different roles? So I guess I wanted to start with you. Star Trek, Star Wars. Do you consider yourself more a Star Trek guy, more a Star Wars guy, or are you somewhere in the middle?
With me, it depends on a lot of factors. Now, I've been over since we decided we were going to do this episode. I've actually been doing a lot of soul searching and just delving deep into the Tao that is Whatnot, trying to figure out exactly. What am I, a Star Trek guy or a Star Wars guy? Because I always said I was one of those fence straddlers where I was like, I like them both equally. And, with the debate of Star Wars, Star Trek, I think you kind of need to pick a side. For me, I got to go, and right up until the last minute, I changed my mind. But, I got to go with Star Trek. I'm a Trek guy. And it's a tough call because for me, Star Wars was such a pivotal part of my childhood. When I was a kid growing up, we were all 100% all Star Wars. That's all we were. But that was when the movies were fresh out when I was a little kid. One of the first movies I ever saw in a movie theater where it wasn't, the family going out. It was me and my brothers and some friends of ours, was Star Wars. And that, to me, was just this really cool thing. I'm like, oh, wow. I don't have to go to a movie theater with mom and dad. I can actually, go with my brothers and actually kind of feel semi-important, like I was an adult. And so that's why Star Wars always had that personal connection for me. But as time went on, as I grew older and the Next Generation came out, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, the follow-up movies, everything, and I'm pulled more into the Star Trek universe. And I'm one of those guys that's the recent Star Trek universe is what has me at Star Trek. The old generation, the original series, I enjoy it for what it is, as the introduction and the creation of it, and I appreciate what Roddenberry did in his original vision for the Star Trek universe. But if they never had, the follow-up stuff, I wouldn't be a Star Trek fan. I would be more of a Star Wars guy. But because of the growth and because of the development of the universe, I call myself a Star Trek guy.
So what side you fell on would depend on what time of your life we're talking about, because there was a time when you would have said I was more of a Star Wars guy.
As a kid, there wasn't even a close debate, because I wanted to be Han Solo. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be a Jedi, even though they thought the Jedis were cool. I wanted to be Han. I wanted to be a space pirate. I wanted to, have a sidekick who was a Wookiee going all the time. I was cool with all of that. I thought Han was the coolest person in the universe. That's who I wanted to be. And part of it, I think, is because of the only Star Trek comparison at the time was the original series. And as a kid, I did have issues with the suspension of disbelief when I'm physically watching it. Now, reading comic books, that type of medium, I'm okay with. But if I had a physical presence in front of me, TV show, movie, I had an issue with the suspension because my eyes are seeing something. I'm like, well, I see that. That's not an actual control panel. That looks just like a cardboard box with some dots and lights on it. That's not real. And that's the special effects they had back in the original series. So it's, but when Star Wars hit the scene, bam, everything exploded with the special effects, with green screen, with all this, oh my God, all this really cool stuff. Like, wow, that's amazing. At the time, it was amazing. But, that was always my drawing. And then as a kid, the television, the Star Trek technology caught up to Star Wars. So then I'm getting this great visual stuff, and then I really started looking at what is the Star Trek universe. And that, for me, I got to say, that's who I am.
For me, it was really tough, because I actually handled this in a similar way you did, where I looked out through my entire life. There's been different points of my life for both series that I've been like, am I a Star Trek fan? Am I a Star Wars fan? It's really hard to tell for me. As a kid growing up, it's funny how initially when I was really young, I wasn't interested in the original Star Trek series until my dad brought home a film strip. When I say a film strip, I should say a film reel of one of the episodes. It was the one with Joan Collins, the one where they wound up going back in time and she was destined to die.
Yeah.
And there was that moral development there. And this was before VCRs. So I had this episode that my dad brought home for my birthday party. We ended up watching this thing, obviously a few times, but then I had it for the whole weekend. So I must have watched that thing 20 times. And that's not an exaggeration. I kept putting it on, if it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the whole weekend, just because it was so cool to be able to watch on demand a program again and again. That was a really important Star Trek memory for me as a childhood. And I loved Kirk, Spock, McCoy. After that, I just got it. For some reason, that was the episode that clicked it all in for me. And then I remember watching it on television then and seeing things like Piece of the Action and stuff like that, which were really great. Star Wars hit, and it was it's this classic space opera. You've got this guy, and as a kid, I was a nerdy kid growing up. So you've got this guy who's living, Luke, who's living on Tatooine. He's kind of like this lost soul. You can tell that, he's got some friends, but they've all moved on to bigger things, Biggs and all that stuff that was talking. And he's this dreamer who dreams of something more out of his life, to be accepted and be a part of something. And he has this, this circumstance that throws him in with Obi-Wan, where, all of a sudden he finds out that he's got the ability to tap into this Force thing, and all of a sudden this guy's gradually becoming more and more important. But what I loved about him was the gradual journey of that. It wasn't like, bam, in the first movie, Luke was instantly the cool guy. We got to see a gradual journey from the beginning to the end of that film, where Luke was slowly becoming in this mismatched gang of misfits, of Princess Leia, who's, part of this rebellion, and they're running from this empire that is doing all these evil things, and they're hooked up with the super cool Han Solo, who's on the run in his own reason. All of them seem to be running from something, but when they come together, it seems like they can combat all of those things. So I was super into that. As I got more into Star Trek as the years have gone on, I started to realize, and this is why I'm having such a dilemma, because I'm going to be honest, as of this recording, I can't tell you if I'm more of a Star Trek or Star Wars guy, because I'm starting to see both of them in very different places now, and I think that's been a gradual development over time. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying about how, as the Star Trek mythos has grown, I like the military concept of the Star Trek universe, where, you've got captains and ensigns, and, each person on the ship has, this important role. Even, the red shirts. Or in the Next Generation, everybody was a red shirt, right? Or not, most of them were. But, it's that concept that everybody on the ship has an important role, and this is a living, breathing environment that these people live on. And, there was even concepts of hangouts were introduced as the series progressed, as we got into the more, the later series, and star bases and things like Deep Space Nine and stuff like that. It really had more of the military aspect of that was really great. And Star Wars was always the high adventure feel for me. And there was something there was a distinction between the two that I kind of see now. I get something different from that. I'm still having a tough time. I loved all of the Star Trek movies. Did you okay, let's talk about film. Did you see all of the movies for both franchises in the theater, or when did you start seeing them in the theater? Or how did that go for you? And I guess I'm assuming Star Wars, you saw all of them in the theater, right?
Yeah. I've seen all the movies in the theater,
including Star Wars. Yeah.
Both on both sides, Star Trek and Star Wars.
Motion picture too for Star Trek.
Oh yeah. I remember when it came out, because my oldest brother Bill is a huge Star Trek fan.
Okay.
So when that movie came out, there was he had to see it, and again, I was allowed to go with I was allowed to go with my brother, and I was so again, it was another cool, I'll go see it, and I saw that in the movie theater, and I gotta admit, I wasn't that impressed when I'm watching one. What? Huh? I wasn't as as excited as I thought I would be with it. But it's it's funny. That's a movie that now I can watch and appreciate more than I could when I was a kid, and it's all part of my growth of the Star Trek universe.
I'm going to have to be honest with you. I agree with you on that. Like, the motion picture, I saw it in the theater, too. That was, the first Star Trek movie. Obviously, it was the first Star Trek movie. But it was the first, obviously the first one I saw in the theater as well. And that one, for some reason, I don't have vivid memories of seeing it in the theater, which means that I got bored. which there's no other way to say it. I remember the special effects a great deal. I remember being wowed. You know, that's that first sequence when they first are unveiling the revamped Enterprise.
Yeah.
And they do the wraparound of it. I have very strong memories of that. There were certain bits, like I remember the whole melding of Decker and Ilea and V'ger at the end. I remember greatly seeing that. I remember Spock on Vulcan for the first time. We got to see Spock reintroduced in that film. You know, after he'd gone through, what was the name of the Vulcan ritual that he went through? Do you remember?
No,
he went through that. I want to say Pon farr is like what's coming to mind, but you know what?
Pon farr is the mating one.
That's the one I was like, I know. That's why I'm like sitting. I'm like, I know I'm throwing just random Vulcan rituals in my mind to try and connect to them. I don't remember which one it was, but it was the one where it was the purging of emotions, and he went there to do that. This calling from V'ger brought him back to the Enterprise crew, and I remember being into that, but I was young. You know, we both were when that came out. It's funny how, like, they've released since, like, the version we saw in the theater wasn't the version that we saw at home. It was more, the version at home's the director's cut.
Yeah.
You know, the longer cut. I'm with you. I actually like that movie now. It's not Wrath of Khan, because Wrath of Khan for me, and you might have a different opinion on this one, Wrath of Khan for me, for the original crew, remains like the movie. And I'm not there's a lot of people listening to this are not that going, oh yeah, you're right on that one. But I really appreciate the motion picture in a way that I did not. I'm with you when I was younger. Do you consider yourself a fan of the motion picture now, or is it just kind of you appreciate it now for what it was?
I would say I appreciate it more than say I'm a fan of it. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think I could. It's been a long time since I've actually seen it. So that's part of the reason I would say appreciate as opposed to a fan. And I honestly, if someone were to tell me, oh, it's the worst movie ever made, I'd argue worst movie ever made, but I really wouldn't argue a good movie. I would say, I can understand why people would think it's terrible and why people would, trash it. I personally enjoyed it. I personally thought, I appreciate what it did and where it went and how it, relaunched the series from television to movie. And there would be a lot of commentary like that, but I wouldn't get into a physical altercation with someone over it by saying, what, are you crazy? It's greatest movie ever. I wouldn't have that type of level of passion. Now, if anyone were to rip on Wrath of Khan, we're throwing down.
Yeah.
We're going to get physical on this one, because that, for me, that was like, I think probably every Star Trek fan out there. We're like, yeah!
See, I would argue Motion Picture's a good film. I saw it a year ago. I loved it. Now, let me clarify that. There's a pacing issue in that movie. There's a lot of great moments in it, though. There's some amazing moments with McCoy when McCoy's first brought back onto the ship. I think the right characters have the right beats in that movie, but there is a pacing problem. And that's what keeps that one from being, Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3. I really liked the Search for Spock as well.
Yeah.
Because it was 2 and 3, to me, they kind of have to go together, because you have what happens in Wrath of Khan, and then you have the build-up we all were waiting for in 3. Yeah. So those two movies together, to me, are my perfect original crew films.
Well, and see, I'm throwing in Voyage Home, which will probably get people, yelling at me. But I liked Voyage Home. I liked the whole thing with the whales, and it was a good, feel-good type movie. It was a fun, you think about a lot of the Star Trek episodes. Some of my personal favorite ones were the fun, there's a little bit of campier. Like Trouble with Tribbles, still one of my favorite episodes of all time, just because it was a lot of enjoyment, just laughing and just throughout from beginning to end. I have that same feeling when I watch Voyage Home, because it still has that where they're back in time and we're going to the Enterprise. They went to the actual Enterprise to get the nuclear material to power up the Klingon ship, and there's just all these nice little nods to present day society up and through the fact that in the end Kirk doesn't get the woman. She goes off and does her thing, and he's like, hey, what's going on here? I'm supposed to be Kirk. I get the woman. Not this time, buddy. And I thought that was just a nice little twist, nice little funny moment at the end of it. There is for me, those 2, 3, and 4 were probably the top of the movie chains, because that was just a great. I keep throwing out fun, but they were. It was a nice build of everything from the con, where you have the great the turmoil of losing Spock, and then 3 you lose the Enterprise, and then 4 it's the voyage home, and they get the new Enterprise, and everything's dun dun dun. You just get that. Yeah, just that energy to it. And you're like, yeah, I want more.
Well, and Spock's journey is completed by 4.
Yeah.
There's stuff that happens in 5 that I guess you could argue continues some of that journey, but I felt like they'd already crossed all of that in 2, 3, and 4. That was like the final moment, where like Spock was kind of back to normal, and but it evolved as well. That was something that was great. The Spock I think that we see in 4 was evolved even more than the Spock that we saw as far as attachment to his human side. Although if you take a look at 2, I loved the Spock at the beginning of Part 2. Because the way that he was with Captain Kirk during the whole training sequence in the beginning of 2 to me is, if I'm ranking the Star Trek movies with the original crew, I would go in the order we just said. I would go 2, 3, and 4. And then I would jump back to motion picture, and then 5 and 6 would probably be in the order that they were in. Yeah, it's funny with Undiscovered Country and 5. I guess it's funny, those 2, I consider them decent films. I'm not like a die-hard fan of either of them for rewatchability. In the sense that, like, if I'm doing a Star Trek marathon, I'm watching all the way through. I am going to watch 5 and 6 because they're not bad films, but they weren't like... It's funny, I can guarantee I would watch motion picture first before I would go to 5 and 6. So it would have to be in that order. 5 and 6, though, are pretty much so equal for me as far as rewatchability. I'm always going to Wrath of Khan first. Once I watch Wrath of Khan, it immediately starts this phase where I have to watch 3 and 4 because of Spock's journey. It's funny, Spock's journey really drives a lot of that for me.
Oh, big time. And it's, I'm kind of in agreement with you. The only thing is, over Undiscovered, over 5 and 6, I would start throwing in the more modern Next Generation movies over those.
Well, I'm just talking original crew right now.
Oh, okay.
See, I don't know if I can...
Star Trek strength is the Next Generation stuff as well. So when I'm looking at overall movies, I do put 2, 3, 4 over the Next Generation stuff, even though I like the Next Generation TV show so much more. I like the modern, TV show, but it's a part of, I think, that nostalgia and just that nod back to, what they did in the present stuff. It kind of like Undiscovered, the Undiscovered, 5 and 6. I wish they would have retooled those a little bit different or changed some stuff around somehow. Especially 6 when it was the generations where it was half, it was both generations. I'm like,
no, that was the one after. It wasn't
Undiscovered Country was the continent, or
that was the last one. Because there was 5, and then there was Undiscovered Country.
No, Undiscovered.
5 was the one with the brother, with Sybok.
Yeah, Undiscovered. That's 5. And then 6
that's right. Yeah, because that was the one. Is 5's the one with Christopher Plummer, right?
Yeah.
Which one's with Christopher Plummer as the Klingon? Is that 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Undiscovered.
Right. Okay. I don't know. I'm separating those two into 2 separate movies. In my head, I am. I'll be honest with you. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm separating Undiscovered Country into 2 separate movies. The Sybok stuff and Christopher Plummer stuff I'm separating, but I shouldn't be. You're right, and then there's Generations. Well, now Generations, what do you rank that? Do you rank that then as an original series film or a Next Generation one? Because, see, I kind of look at that myself as a Next Generation film. I don't look at that as an original, even though Kirk is in it and there's a nod, obviously to the original crew and everything with what happens in the film. I do look at that one more as a Next Generation film. But how do you see it? You don't have to see it the same way I do.
Well, I do see it as Next Generation film. It's kind of like their version of Film 1, where at the time when it came out, I was like, really? I don't know about this, guys. And then when their second film came out, I was like, yeah, okay, this is more like it. This is what I wanted to see. This is cool. So it kind of felt the same type of vibe and feel that I had with the original series, where when the first movie came out, I was like, I don't know. Then Wrath of Khan came out. I was like, yeah. Well, same thing with Next Generation. Their first movie, I was kind of lukewarm on it, and partly because I'm like, either old generation or new generation. Don't mix the two. Don't bring that in. That was just something that kind of had me a little irked. And so when the second one came out, where it was just the new generation, the next generation, we're like, okay, we are going to trust on our franchise. I was like, yes, okay, now we're going good. This is what I'm digging.
Yeah, it's really funny. Out of watching the films, like, when was the last time you watched any of the Star Trek movies?
It would be, let's see here, easily within 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I saw crud, I can't think of the name of it now. The last Next Generation movie,
Nemesis.
Yeah, thank you. I drew a blank there for a second. Within the last, it was in my new house. So within under a year is when I last saw it, and it was one of those things where I was kind of surfing and I saw it pop up. I'm like, oh, okay, this is early enough, and I watched probably 3/4 of the movie.
Dude, Star Trek V was the final frontier. Star Trek VI is the undiscovered country. I'm right. 5 and 6 are two separate films. Generations, the 7th movie. That was driving me nuts. I'm right.
Oh, crud, yeah.
Final Frontier was the Cybok one, Spock's half-brother.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
And the Undiscovered Country, number 6, was the Christopher Plummer one. I'm right. I just went and looked this up because I'm like sitting here, I'm like, I know that I got to admit, 5 and 6 are the two I don't watch as much as the other ones. Like, 2, 3, and 4 are my paper grading movies. And let me explain that one. This is totally a compliment to the films. I tend to go to films when I'm getting stuff ready for report cards. And I'm talking about tasks where I've got to be checking off homework. I've got to be checking off, certain things that I don't need my full attention on. But we've all got those things in our job that are like, sorting and, getting things organized and things like that. And I need a film when I'm doing that, something to sit down. But I always go to a film that I've watched over and over again, so I don't have to devote my full attention to the film. But when I'm ready to take a break for like 10 minutes and really focus on what's going on the television, I know that this is going to hit me with high-quality moments. 2, 3, and 4 are in that rotation of they've got to be a part of that. It's so these are films that I watch every year. I've got to. 5 and 6 tend to be ones that if I'm doing a crazy marathon, I will throw 5 and 6 in there just because of their history. But it was funny how, like, when you were saying it, I'm like sitting there, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm wrong on this one. Maybe I've screwed up. But the Christopher Plummer one is separate from the
right.
So then there was Generations.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Okay.
So that was driving me nuts. Well, Can we wait before we go heavy into the Next Generation discussion? Because I think this will be a good chance we can kind of like wrap up a little original series discussion, go over to Star Wars for a little bit, and then come back to Next Gen, because I feel like Next Gen in and of itself, I don't know about you, I separate the original series from Next Gen. Now, not that I'm saying that I consider them part of a separate universe, but for me, Next Generation had so much depth to it that like it's its own thing. I know it's part of the larger Star Trek universe, and I like that. I like, we're continuity fans, right? So we're into that. But I want to jump back to the original series for a couple seconds to talk about what is your experience with the original series in other medium? Like, have you played original series Star Trek games? Have you read novels? Have you read comics? Did you watch the animated series? What is your exposure, and do you have any involvement in it now other than rewatching favorites? Like, where are you at with the original series crew?
With the original series, I read a couple stories. I read a couple short stories, but never anything major. Again, as I said, my brother Bill was heavy into it, so we had a lot of the books around, and occasionally he would say, "Oh, this is a really cool." Like the one story that's coming to mind is they had a short story where the TV show crew got pulled into the actual Star Trek universe. And they were actually in there, and and people were looking at them thinking that was Captain Kirk, Spock. It was Kirk, Spock, and Bones. So those three got pulled into the actual universe. And it was a short story, and I don't even remember where it was published or who published it. And if Brother Bill is listening, he will tell me, I'm sure, in a text or whatnot, email, saying, hey, it's this, name of the issue, here's the story, here's where it was and whatnot. But yeah, so I've got very little exposure on other medium of the original series.
Did you read any of the novels?
I didn't really read the novels. I would start reading them, and I would quickly lose interest. It was just, I don't know, for some reason, back back when they were coming out, I wasn't that heavy into reading the novels. I wasn't into that. I was more into picture books. I was more into comics. I was more into TV. I didn't have as passionate love of reading that I have now.
Bill McGinnis, our friend, his mom was very into Trek. She got me into reading some of the original series novels, particularly the work of Diane Carey. There was a book called Dreadnought, and I believe the sequel, and I'm throwing this off the top of my head so anybody's a Diane Carey fan, there was a sequel called Battle Stations. And I remember, and if I'm off on the title, I apologize, but Dreadnought was the first one. And it was the original series, but the Dreadnought, with the idea was this was like this, I remember this being like a powerful ship that was well sought out, that was, kind of like the Enterprise, but like if somebody really souped it up. It was cool because you got this great, because it was a novel, this great exploration. Like, Carey did a great job of making you feel like you were there. So when you were reading it, it moved very fast. You got into the heads of the characters. You felt like you were walking around on the Enterprise, which is hard to do in a novel, where you've got your people visualizing, things that you aren't seeing, other than that you've seen the cover and the painting of what, the Dreadnought should look like and the Enterprise and all, the classic beats. But one thing she was really good at is she captured the voices of the characters. So these were the characters that you were seeing in the films, in the original series. I was a big fan of that book. I remember there was also a book, I believe, called Enterprise, and there was a book, Spock's World, maybe, or Spock's... It was something about, if it was a Spock focus. She gave me a lot of the books that she was reading. I remember just really digging them when I read them. But I remember the Diane Carey stuff was something I actually asked for a Christmas present because I wanted to read them again, and I still have them to this date because they're some of my favorite Star Trek books. I've not read all of them, all the Star Trek books. It's one of those things where I get a fix, and I want to, start reading a novel. So I'll pick up from time to time. They did more recently. They did a really cool Khan series called the Eugenics War, I believe. It was the title of it. It was all about Khan. It was a multi-book series, and I really quite enjoyed that because I'm a Khan junkie. I love that guy, Ricardo Montalban as Khan. Like, I love the original series episode when he first appeared, and I love that they took this character from this like random episode from the classic series and revolved one of my shortlist films. Wrath of Khan for me is easily in my top 10 list of favorite films of all time. Go ahead. And
if we're going to say it, let's say it right. Mm-hmm. Khan!
Yeah, what a great movie, right? But that's kind of my exposure there. What about games? Have you done any, we'll stick to original series right now, any original series Star Trek gaming at all?
No, I'm very little gaming.
Interplay did this, it was a 2-game series, and one of them was called the Star Trek 25th Anniversary, and then there was a sequel to that. What was cool about that was it was like those point-and-click adventures, but they were episodic, and they took place in the time frame of the original series, but after the original series, if that made sense. So they had an opportunity to do sequels to some of the original series episodes, but also they did this cool bit in there where they bridged the original series to the first few films. So, like, you get to see Carol Marcus and the whole Genesis device, all that stuff, as it's being created in an episode of Star Trek, which was kind of cool. So as a gamer, and they had the voices, because originally when it was released, it was just text. But then as computer systems got better, they re-released it with the voice of a lot of the original actors. So it was just a very cool way to play a game. With them being the point-and-click adventures, you could do all the stuff that like you would expect to do. You would do away team missions, and you would have, the usual equipment that you would expect, like the phasers and, all your scanning equipment and stuff like that. And you had to solve puzzles using everything felt like it should be a part of a Star Trek episode. You weren't doing like weird things like picking up a random banana that like, why am I doing this? It's a Star Trek game, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Everything you did in the adventure game felt like stuff you would be doing in the episode. And there were times where there was moral dilemmas where you had to think through your actions in order to solve what you were doing. There was times where you would pilot the Enterprise and have to react to attacks and things like that. So it was cool. I mean, it was a lot of depth to it for adventure games. And I remember just that series is on a short list of fond memories to me of especially with I love continuity, the connectability of bringing that and connecting it to, those episodes to the films I was geeking out. And I believe there was a Muds sequel, the Muds Women. I believe there was a Harry Mudd episode in there. I'm going back a long way now. I definitely remember the references to the Genesis device, but I believe there was a Harry Mudd episode in there as well. You mentioned Tribbles earlier. Can we talk about, and this would be kind of a general, not just Star Trek, but Star Wars thing, because we might as well throw the Ewoks kind of in this, and characters like Jar Jar and stuff like that. Where are you at on cartoony characters in these worlds? Because I like the serious nature of these worlds. I like tongue-in-cheek humor in high, intense situations, where you've got the cool character during an action moment. Like Han Solo, it's okay if Han Solo cracks off one-liners, especially when he's doing it to Chewbacca, and Chewbacca kind of laughs and stuff like that, because it's not going too far. I love the episode Trouble with Tribbles. I think it's a fun episode. And the characters in that one didn't seem to lose anything for me. I feel similarly about the Ewoks. For some reason, I know they bother some people. Ewoks don't bother me at all. It's funny how I don't have the hatred for Jar Jar that a lot of people do, but I don't have the fondness for Jar Jar that I do for the Ewoks and the Tribbles. So, it's funny how Ewoks and Tribbles, I wouldn't even say they have a pass. I don't have an issue with either of them. Jar Jar, I guess I would say I give Jar Jar a pass, but there's not the fondness that I would have for the Ewoks and the Tribbles. Where are you at on those three in particular, seeing as you brought up the whole Tribbles thing? Because that was one of the things I did want to talk about, was characters like that.
Well, as a general concept, fun, campy type of characters are okay. I think they're more acceptable on a TV series than they would be in the movie. Yeah. And also, depending on their involvement, how heavy focused they are in the movie. Now, when you look at it, Tribbles, it's a TV show, it's a fun thing. It wasn't, the main interaction wasn't the little things going, the little fuzzballs doing that. It was the crew, it was the Klingons, it was everybody doing their own interactions with these little crazy little things. That's what made the episode. Ewoks, same type of thing. Yeah, you have these little walking, talking teddy bears, but there was the main characters' interactions with them. And then when it came time to actually throw down, those Ewoks were throwing down, and there was some funny moments when they tried to trip the one walker, and they're you're sitting there thinking, hey, that may work. And next thing you know, this mechanical leg just slides these little Ewoks along the road and doesn't even slow it down. And you had a couple cool moments where the Ewoks are able to take down the one carrier with those two big logs and just crunch it. And then you get that tender moment where some Ewoks start dying, and they're just blasting these little things, and you just have these, oh my god, I can't believe they killed all the Ewoks. It really pulled your heartstrings. It made it part of the it made you pull in. It gave you that connection to it. And I thought the campy, funny moments were accentuated with real acting, real character development. And with that being said, Jar Jar Binks, where's the airlock? Let's throw him in and hit release. I'm in that camp of I hate Jar Jar Binks, and I've tried to approach Jar Jar with that same with that same logic that I applied with the Ewoks, where if you look at some of this stuff, you get some cool character moments with the Jedis dealing with them, and just the one little, you can kind of maybe take a little one-liner, but just, I don't know, there's just something about Jar Jar. He just really annoys me. And I think if Jar Jar's language had been more of clicks and chirps and something that wasn't exactly, that didn't sound like our language, I probably would be more accepted if I had to read what Jar Jar was saying as opposed to actually hearing his voice. And I know that sounds odd, and I admit that, but I think part of the neat things behind the Ewoks was the fact that we didn't understand what they were saying. It was interpreting, and it was C-3PO interpreting, or physical presence interpreting, where the character's like, okay, what's he talking about? Oh, okay, I see what he's doing. Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that for me was a better connection than actually hearing Misa Jar Jar Binks. It just kind of was nails in the chalkboard for me. And
do you feel the same way? Do you feel the same way about Jar Jar's people?
Yes and no. The one, like when we have the king, when that whole courtroom appearance where they're doing the mind tricks on him and they convince him to, hey, give us a sub. Okay, yeah, we'll take Jar Jar, spare his life. And just that whole interaction with the king, I wasn't as bad with Jar Jar. And I think it's because it's such limited dealings with that king that it wasn't an ongoing, matter. And just like at the end with the fight sequence, I thought that was actually kind of cool. I liked seeing the different fight style. I liked seeing them getting ready up again. It was more of it was a remnants to me of the Ewok battle going up against the high tech. It was the more simple, more basic, one with nature, aquatic type creatures dealing with this mechanized army. And I kind of liked seeing that battle and just how it was playing out. I didn't have an issue with that as much as it was really just Jar Jar's interaction, Jar Jar's voice. It got to me.
See, Jar Jar's people overall, I liked. The problem with this is where Jar Jar, I don't think, has the same endearing quality of like a Wicket from the Ewoks. Wicket, I felt, was competent. I also liked how when Wicket realized that he was in over his head, he'd hide. Like when he first encounters Leia and the stormtroopers come, Wicket, kind of goes and does the stealth thing, which I thought, okay, this is animal instincts. We're seeing this creature, who's indigenous of this planet. They obviously there's creatures on that planet that are predators of them. They've learned how to survive, and they've got this whole culture, and, they're more primitive, yes, but then they've also got this instinctual side to them that I really liked. Jar Jar's people, when we got to the underwater city and we saw the ruler, you started to get this whole idea of the different politics between the surface dwellers and the underwater people. While I wasn't through the roof with them, I actually liked a lot of the direction they went in, especially when Padme had to deal with some political dealings with them to ask them for help, and then they helped out with the battle. The problem with the battle, I've never had a problem with C-3PO and R2-D2's comedy moments, because there's something about them that work, because you can blast C-3PO and his pieces will go all over the place. Yeah. And R2, you kind of get that he's a survivor because of the way he's shaped, and he's kind of built like a tank anyway. So it all just seems to kind of work. And those comedy moments make you smile and chuckle, and R2's going to have to put C-3PO back together because he got blasted. If Jar Jar could be blasted into pieces, I'd probably be more endeared to him. When he's on the battle and like surviving by things getting caught in his legs and flicking them around and stuff like that, I'm like, no, because his people are actually interesting in the battle. Because you can see some of them are hunters, and they're using some of those skills. There's clear overwhelming odds there, but I liked that when you saw his people battling, they had like certain tech that would be, make sense, those shields and things that they were putting up. I'm like, wow, these are overwhelming odds, but these people are like making a stand. There's something courageous about them, and they do have combat skills that we're coming across. So I actually quite liked his people. It was just Jar Jar's moments on the battlefield, and I'm not one of the people that's real anti the first film. There's a lot in the first film that I like. I look at that first film in the series as a prologue of a 6-part novel, especially having watched all those films together now. I don't think it's as terrible a film as a lot of people say it is. But there are certain moments, like the Jar Jar one, I'm like, oh, no, come on, too much cartoony stuff. Like, let's take a little bit of back away on this a little bit, because his people, you've actually crafted an interesting group of people. Naboo's an interesting planet if you don't go too far with it and make it too silly. That was the problem. It got a little too silly. I think that's part of the problem I had with the later 2 Star Trek films in the original series, 5 and 6, when we were talking about those. I liked both of those, but they got a little too silly. To the point where, like, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are almost a little too silly. To the point where you're taking these people these are the guys that fought Khan, and you're doing this to them? Like, that was kind of my thing with it. I liked both 5 and 6 of the 2 Star Trek films, but it's the same problem. It's, we're getting a little too silly here. I'm not against comedy, but it's got to be cool one-liners, high five moments where, like, did Kirk just say that? When Kirk flips open that thing, Spock, it's been 2 hours, or what's our status? And everyone is, doing the wink and the nod to everybody. You need those moments in there. You're not going to get that from a Jar Jar. I did like, switching back over to Star Trek, and I guess we're going to have to compare the first 3 Star Wars movies to, the prequel films. in there. So let's just talk, seeing as we're in the prequel films, let's talk the prequel films, and then we'll go to, obviously the meat and potatoes, the ones that we love. When we look at the prequel films, I liked Anakin quite a bit. I liked Liam Neeson. I liked Obi-Wan. That was all the stuff that I wanted to see, and I thought that was really well done. What did you think of Padme, the character of Padme? This is Leia's mother. Luke and Leia's mother, I should say. It's funny how I associate her more with Leia, though, and I think just because of, obviously, the intention of having her do hairstyles and certain ways that she dresses and carries herself that are more reminiscent of Leia, especially, in the Bespin sequences in, Empire Strikes Back. I think that there's certain moments where you can really see that in Padme and the way she carries herself. What did you think of Padme as a character?
Yeah, I liked the prequel movies. And it's funny because I'm saying I'm more of a Star Trek guy than a Star Wars guy. But I did enjoy those first 3 movies. And I enjoy the 4, 5, and 6. 1 through 6, I actually enjoyed all the movies. And I thought Padme was a great character. And, aside from, and some of those comments you made about Jar Jar it was ringing a bell. It was hitting home for me. And part of the reason I never really could place why I disliked the character so much. But it was because gross incompetence on his part when you see his people are really cool. They could have kept him more competent, more intelligent, more actually. It could have made him a solid character and built more on a foundation, and it would have been a much better fit, and it would have been a much better kind of groove. Now with Padme, she's everything I would think she should have been. You see her, the introduction of her as, the princess, the queen, the diplomat, and then as it's going on, you see the strength of Luke and Leia, especially Leia. You see that strength in her. And I think that was a great, just set up for what is to come. And I got a lot of kicks out of her, especially as the movies progress, seeing, different, I'm like, okay, I could see Leia doing that. I could see that happening. And she really fit well for me, and I thought she did a great job of it. And I'm not even going to knock Anakin, and I know there's a lot of people who knock his acting and how he handled it. I thought that was great. I truly enjoyed the movies. I think those 2 actors got a better rapport with each other as the movies went along.
Yes.
The initial stuff, you can see, if you watch the movies carefully, you can see, okay, this was probably filmed early on in the thing because there's not a good chemistry or a vibe between them. But you get a couple sequences where it just seemed natural and flow. And you're like, okay, these 2 look like they're actually in love. They look like they're actually married now. This seems like a real legitimate couple as opposed to 2 actors trying to pretend to be a couple. And I think that is something that I would say people were more of critical of just the chemistry, but you gotta just you sit back, look at the overall, and by the end of it, they had that solid groove going.
What was my problem with Jar Jar, and I will kind of drop Jar Jar after this, but you're kind of growing on it more. My problem, I liked when he was first introduced. I never loved the character, but there was something endearing about him in the initial introduction, how, he accidentally, Ewan McGregor's, Obi-Wan came, and obviously we've got also... Qui-Gon, sorry, thank you so much. Qui-Gon, when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan come across this guy, and really Qui-Gon first, you get to see, this really cool moment where, they're getting to find out who the people are on the planet. They're realizing that they need help, because the situation they're in over their heads, they need a guide. Jar Jar winds up being one of those where they kind of show some compassion to this hopeless guy, recognizing that, if they leave Jar Jar there, he's going to be in trouble. And Qui-Gon has this kind of religious thing where he's kind of like, fate's kind of put me here. The Force has put me here. I'm seeing this creature who's in dire straits, who's in need of guidance. I feel like the Force has put me here to forward this guy's life. And it never pays off. That, I wanted to see, Jar Jar have, a redemption, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that Jar Jar all of a sudden is going to become real swift and, hi, I'm Jar Jar. I wasn't looking for that kind of thing. But it never, Jar Jar was always a happy accident.
Yeah.
I mean, even, anything that happened in the battle with him, there was never a moment where you felt like Jar Jar. And we already have kind of 3PO for that, if that makes sense. 3PO's there is to be the translator droid, true. But if there's anyone that's going to get blasted and fall into accidents, it's going to be 3PO, right?
Yeah.
You don't need another 3PO. And that was part of the problem. Jar Jar, it became like too much of what 3PO already provides to the film franchise. And that's where it stopped. That's what kind of, because we got the introduction of 3PO in this, I'm like, we've already got 3PO. We don't need another one. Whereas if Jar Jar's story had somehow led to some form of redemption, where like throughout his roles in all of these films, you got to see like a very competent, maybe a relatively some growth for the character. Other than the fact that he dresses a little nicer, because he never really seems to have that moment. Even I watched the Clone Wars cartoon. He doesn't seem to. He kind of makes a little progress, but certainly not the kind of progress you would want to have for a character like that. He's always like this happy accident.
Yeah,
and he's hard to get behind because of that.
He should have been, how you think about how Han was. Han was the rascal. He was the rogue. He was the pirate. And by the end, he comes across as this honorable man, as this, leader of the rebellion, as this, great, you see he cares more than he just doesn't care about money. Jar Jar, they should have gone with kind of that route with him. They should have made him a bit of a rascal, made him maybe a thief or somebody that you really couldn't completely trust. And, Qui-Gon sees something more in him and then gives him the chance and he steps up and he becomes a leader of his people. They could have gone that whole positive route with him instead of going with the goofball angle. And I think if they would have done that, Jar Jar would be he would be a cool character. He'd definitely be a solid, enduring character. Because right now, in all of those movies, the only neat, cool characters you really have are the Jedis. Anybody who's supporting him, Padme isn't a Jedi, but she's connected with all that. But there's no real people outside of the Jedis, outside of that you say, yeah, that's a cool character. I wish, I'd like to be like him.
Well, on the comic book end, I want to mention this real quick, and then we'll jump back into just the Star Wars. On Star Trek, I read some of the gold key issues of Star Trek, because they used to have them when you go to grocery stores. Remember those 3-packs of comics?
Yep.
I remember grabbing some Star Trek comics from there. Now, I didn't read a ton of them, but when they were there, I read them, and I greatly enjoyed them. The other, DC did a Star Trek series, and I remember reading some of that. And it was when, the 2 and 3 films. It was during that era that I remember I think I'm almost positive that's when DC series was published. I was reading some form of Star Trek comics there, and I remember that they had to play around with how do you deal with Spock, with what happened, and they found clever ways to do that. I'm not going to spoil too much of that, because if there's somebody out there who's like seeking out those issues, I don't want to certainly ruin the comic book end of it, because that stuff was great. But I always marveled at that, because going back to Star Wars now, because I want to talk about Star Wars and other media, and that's what triggered my memories of how they dealt with Spock in the comics. They also, in Star Wars, had to deal with Han Solo in the Marvel comic, because Marvel did a Star Wars comic, and probably that's the one in that era that I read the most. I was a Star Wars junkie. And we didn't have the advantage with Star Wars of having so many television episodes. Really, there were novels, but not to the same level of what you could get with Star Trek novels. The Star Wars novels were like few and far between. They had a cool, as a kid it was great, they had a 3-book Han Solo cycle, which, it's Han Solo.
Yeah.
And, so that stuff was great. And there was a couple other books, and I remember reading them all, at the library, or I owned the Han Solo ones, and the other ones I would read at the library, and there was 2 other ones, and I'm drawing a blank on the names. But, that stuff, I was like a sponge. I would grab that stuff and read it. And we had no budget when we were kids to speak of for that type of stuff. But it was really great to have some form of extra Star Wars. But that was go ahead.
I think that's one of the reasons that I call myself a larger Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan, because I have so much more in the Star Trek universe to pull from and to watch and, and be active, and actually the continuation of the story. With Star Wars, I can remember as a kid going, why aren't they doing more movies? Why aren't they doing a TV show? Why aren't they? And I wanted more stuff, and they were never giving it to me. And that kind of, I went from having this excitement and love of Star Wars to saying, hey, look at this Star Trek stuff. Hey, and that's really why I got more into Star Trek, because Next Generation came on. They gave me more stuff, other TV shows. And if they would have given more Star Wars stuff, whether it's movies, TV shows, anything that could, would be like officially licensed and sanctioned, and something that's like, okay, this is Lucas's continuation of the story, I probably would have, picked it up and I would have pulled into it. Because you're talking about novels. I remember there was a Splinter in the Mind's Eye.
Oh, that's the one. Thank you. I read that one. That was great.
Yeah, like later on, they put out some more books, like the Thrawn series, Courtship of Princess Leia.
Oh, wait, hang on. When we get to that stuff, that's more modern day, and we do need to talk about that, because that's the expanded universe. Well, actually, let's go there, seeing as you're already going there. I take it back. Let's go ahead and go there. That's the Timothy Zahn stuff, which they actually just released a 25th anniversary version of that novel. I ended up grabbing it for my Kindle, reread it, and it had all these anecdotes and things about the creation of that novel. Have you read a lot of the Star Wars expanded universe? Because that's huge, because it's in the comics, it's also and it's pretty tightly woven, in the sense where they've crafted like a pretty cool timeline of history for Star Wars in the novels and in the comics that intersect. Dark Horse has played pretty close attention to what's going on in the novels. I have not read, I won't pretend I've read all of them, but I've read quite a few novels, but mainly I've read a lot of Dark Horse comics, because the Dark Horse comic stuff is really top-notch. But I did read the Timothy Zahn novels that you're mentioning, that 3-book cycle, and then what came afterwards. Anything Zahn has written, I've grabbed immediately, because I think he really understood it. What about you? What's your exposure to any of that stuff, seeing as you went there?
Well, the Zahn series, I picked that up. And I read it, and I was like, "Oh, this is great!" And then as that Courtship of Princess Leia, I remember reading that, and I thought that was a really cool story, because again, it was more continuation of the story. But after that stuff started coming out, I was like, "Okay, let's." And I wanted the official stuff. I was like, "Yeah, we're getting this great story." And Zahn completely, I'm reading the stuff and I'm hearing the voices. He's so had it perfectly down. But I was like, why didn't they ever make this into a movie? Why didn't they ever do this? And that was I started getting angry with the Star Wars universe, because they had all this material. They had all this stuff out there, all these other stories that they could have, and nothing was, quote unquote, officially getting made. And as this is going on, Star Trek universe was continuing on with Next Generation, continue on with Deep Space Nine, Voyager. They continued the growth of the universe and the family, and I felt like they were saying, okay, the fans want more, let's give them more. Star Wars fans wanted more, but they weren't being given any more, other than these other stories and these other books and this other crafting of this universe. But I was like, come on, let's let the main man, the guy who created this, the visionary who created this, give us more. We never got that, and I think that was my big turn against Star Wars. And it's not even, I don't want to say turn, make it sound like I hate it, because I don't. I still am a Star Wars fan, but the reason I consider myself a Star Trek fan over Star Wars is because I feel the Star Trek universe, the Star Trek people behind it said, okay, we recognize our fans and we want to give them more of what they're asking for.
Did you read the Hand of Thrawn novels, the pair of novels that take place after the trilogy?
I never read those.
Were you a fan of Mara Jade and the relationship between Luke and Mara Jade?
See, yeah, I was. I can't remember why.
Dude, I'm not going to ruin anything for you. Do yourself a favor and read those 2 books. One of them is extremely pivotal to that relationship. See, I guess to me, and this is something, it's funny with Disney taking over, I've got a lot of leanings towards Star Wars. And I have a lot of trouble not saying that I'm more of a Star Wars guy. The problem is I so respect and love the Star Trek franchise. I'm having trouble saying that because I feel like if I say that, I'm diminishing my love for Star Trek. So that's where I'm having trouble. But, oh boy, the amount of great creators that have done things with the expanded Star Wars universe in gaming. I mean, there's so many great games that have come out, because I am a Star Wars junkie. When a new game comes out, probably because a lot of what you're saying, I want to jump towards the new Star Trek game. I love watching the animated series when they come out. They've had 2 great Clone Wars animated series. But the novels and the Dark Horse comics, I cannot recommend highly enough if you were a fan of Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade in particular. and the whole Thrawn storyline. You do need to read the Hand of Thrawn pair of novels, because there's things that particularly happen there that I do not want to ruin for you that you should really read.
I think that one came out when we were in college.
Yes.
And I think that's why I never really picked it up, because I was always busy with other stuff. And it was during the college years, I went through a period in the college years where I didn't read anything fun. I just focused on only thing. If I'm going to read something, it's going to be school related, and that was it. And that was even when I started dropping off my comic books. Even started going away. During that kind of segment of my life, and that's part of the time when I stopped getting comics, because I was just so part of it was finances, but part of it I was just so focused on I got to I got to do this, I got to graduate, I got to finish this stuff. So I kind of was stepping away from enjoyment, stuff that was fun for me, just to focus on the task at hand. So I think that's why I never read that series. But I tell you, I still remember reading the Zahn stuff, and still remember saying, "Man, this guy knows what he's doing." And so I'll see if I can find it, pick it up.
You know what it was for me during a lot of that era? It was a lot of what you're saying. I didn't have a lot of comic book budget, so because of that, I needed to turn to libraries. We had this cool trilogy that you mentioned with Zahn that came out, but then we started to gradually start to see, as that line started to become more successful, more authors tackling the Star Wars line. I haven't read all of it. There's a lot of people listening to this that are probably Star Wars experts to the upteenth degree more than me. But everything I read, I was like a sponge. And it was great to be able to delve into more fun with the characters that I grew up with. It's funny, I know that when the prequel trilogy came out, it started to establish the idea that the 6-film series was about Vader's story, but there's that part of me, the kid in me, it's about Luke, Han, Leia, yeah. Lando, all those guys, Chewie, C-3PO, R2-D2, Yoda, all those characters. So when you start expanding on that kind of stuff and giving me new stories with that, and then adding new characters in them and exploring Wedge more. Some of the supporting cast that we didn't really get to see. There was a new book they just released called Smugglers. And I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I ended up grabbing it right away, because I'm like, oh, this is all, it's going to be, the whole Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and all that kind of world. I'm into that kind of stuff. So I'm going to read it. It's one of those on my, I've got it. It's on my list to read probably over the summer. It's a book that I'm going to really enjoy. But so I don't get every single one of the books, but I do pick and choose based on titles and the premise of the book which Star Wars book that I'm going to read, because I just want to read more of the world and the universe. I do read the ongoing Star Wars comic right now. That's from Dark Horse by Brian Wood. I cannot recommend it highly enough for fans of the original 4, 5, and 6 films. The current series, what's going on right now, takes place, it's just started. It takes place after A New Hope. And the great part about it is, without giving too much away, it focuses Luke, Han, Leia, after the events of the first Star Wars movie. Before Empire Strikes Back, they're on the run for a lot of the things that I really loved about these characters. You've got Luke, who isn't the Luke that we see in Empire, the Luke that we see in Return of the Jedi. This is a Luke who's just getting his head around the fact that he's connected to the Force. What does that mean? Should he pursue that? He hasn't even, Dagobah is not something he's made the decision on yet. We see that happen in Empire. So it's a lot more explanation of what it's like for Luke in that time between the destruction of the Death Star and what happens in Empire Strikes Back. And it's real interesting because it's fleshing out things that we never got to see happen on screen. Leia having to deal with the role that she's this princess, but she's also this diplomat, and she is a leader of the rebellion, but it also brings in a greater role for Akbar and Mon Mothma, or however you pronounce her name. I forget what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I always, do you butcher her name too? Yes. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I see it in a million texts, and how I pronounce it now is how and I don't know if it's right or if I'm wrong, but I think hopefully everybody out there who's screaming that I'm butchering it knows who I'm talking about. I love the interactions between that. These are characters that were there all along. We don't see them until Empire and Return, but they're characters that were there all along, and they had a major role in the rebellion. Because we were focused on just that small part of it, I like the expansion of it. It's also more dealings with the fact that Han Solo, by coming back to the Death Star, has put himself in a position where he's now on the run from the Empire. So where can he operate as a smuggler?
He's on the run from everybody. Everybody now wants a piece of Han Solo. And I think that's something that's, I always liked about the character. And it was that kind of that final capstone when we see him get captured and we see him get frozen in carbonite, and no matter what he offered Jabba, he's not getting out of it. He one time too many wheeled and dealed. Hey, I got your money. Yeah, I'll get it for you. Hey, trust me, I'm good for it. He did it one too many times, and this was the final straw. There's no debate. There's no arguing. There's no way talking your way out of this one. And that was something that they mentioned and it was made reference to. And I wish it would have been nice. They couldn't have done it in the movie. It would have been nice to have a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe actually shown one of the bounty hunters coming after him, not coming after the rebellion, coming after Han.
That would be great. I'm with you. I would really dig that. Let's talk about the films. Which if you had to take, let's go with 4. I'm guessing 4, 5, and 6. Does it go in that order for you, or is it a different order for you? For me, I guess. Well, let me do my order, and then I'll let you do it, and we gotta go that way. I guess I have to go to 4, 5, and 6, and it's a really strange order. It has to go according to rewatchability for me. This is probably going to anger a whole bunch of people. I would say first for me, it's Empire, then Return, and then Star Wars. And that's not a diminishing at all the original Star Wars movie. I watch them in order every time I watch them, so I can't say that I ever have started with Empire and gone through, because I tend to watch all 3 of them. But Empire for me is kind of like after the events of, we really get to start to seeing an expansion of a lot of the ideas that were introduced in the original Star Wars film. We get to see what it means to be a Jedi a lot more than what we got to see with Ben Kenobi. When Luke's hanging upside down and pulling a lightsaber to himself and all that, I really started to get into all that stuff in Empire. Luke's training, and there wasn't a lot of, there was funny moments, especially when, with stuff that was going on in the Millennium Falcon and stuff, but there wasn't silly moments. That film was so dark that, you couldn't really do a whole bunch of silly. Yoda, even though Yoda was a Muppet, there was funny comedy there. But, oh my gosh, did that character, when you realize who that guy is, the whole tone of Yoda changed. And that puppet became oh my gosh, that's Yoda. And look, he's lifting up, X-Wings. You start taking him seriously when he's making Luke run and flip and stuff like that. It's okay, you're suspending my disbelief from when I originally saw the character and I was convinced he was a puppet. By the end of that whole sequence of events, that was no longer a puppet, that was Yoda. And I think that's where he veers off from a Jar Jar. That's the distinct difference between that. You can do a puppet and make me believe that he is a Jedi Master. That's what I want to see with a character. By the end of the introduction of the character, I should believe he's something totally different. The stuff when Luke went into that cave and he's faced with the exploding version of his face, inside the Vader mask, and just so much. The relationship between Han and Leia being introduced there, and just how tragic all that was. It made me so much want to see Return of the Jedi that I love Return of the Jedi. I love the fight between Luke and Vader in Return of the Jedi. There's so much payoff in Return of the Jedi that I really, really love. But very similar to what I talked about with Wrath of Khan when we're talking about Star Trek, Empire's the one that really, for me, sets up so much of, I want to see this. I want to see more. It sets up my emotions for, I think, a lot of the reasons why I like the Zahn books. Empire was the one, when I walked out of the theater, I was a kid. I remember a friend of my dad, I can remember, it's the DeFiores, Mike DeFiore and Joanne DeFiore. We ended up being over at their house. It might have been the second time I saw the film or the first. I don't remember. Because back then you did that. You went to the theater multiple times. I can't remember how many times I saw Star Wars in the theater. But I remember getting the paperback novel. And I swear this is the first time I saw the film. I sat down when I got the paperback novel of that. At their house, they had this patio that was attached to their garage. It wasn't attached to their house. It was on the side of their garage. I sat out there the whole day and read that book cover to cover. I could not put it down. And this was the regular novel of the film because I was that into that movie. And that's where my meter starts to shift towards the Star Wars side of things when I have memories like that. Action figures. I mean, very few memories in my life, aside from like Mego DC Heroes. And I shouldn't be just Mego DC Heroes because I had Spider-Man, Captain America, all that stuff, the Mego superheroes. Very few toy lines have fond memories for me as it did collecting Star Wars stuff. That stuff was, for me, toys that I played with left and right. And that was my expanded universe for similar reasons you mentioned earlier. We didn't have Star Wars on TV. The holiday special doesn't count. And the Ewok movies certainly don't count. It was funny as a kid because it was feast or famine with Star Wars stuff. I remember watching the Ewok movies and at least acknowledging the fact that, like, they were interesting to see once because at least it was something Star Wars. Which just tells you how much of a Star Wars fan I was, that I'm like, okay, I guess I can remember that. I've since seen them and I'm like, oh boy, I don't remember them being this. But the toys were great. Go ahead.
Well, and that was the thing with the toys, toy-wise, playing Star Wars, with, me and my brothers and our friends in the neighborhood. We all came over and we gathered around, our backyard. We'd set up, fortresses and did various whatnot, and just, we continued on the story. There was multiple times where the toys were the continuation for us. And that's, again, as a kid. That was as a childhood. That was, it was G.I. Joe action figures and Star Wars. And we mixed the two together. So you've got, Snake Eyes flying around in the Millennium Falcon. We had it all combined and together, and it was just a really cool blend of the universe as it was. And that's, where we had, and that was our fun. And that was as a kid growing up. But as we grew older, we stopped playing with the toys. And then when we stopped playing with the toys, we didn't have anything else to replace it with. There was, some novels and there was some reading, but there wasn't anything, that I could really latch my teeth on. And
you didn't do the gaming then?
No.
Like you didn't do like Dark Forces or any of that kind of stuff?
No.
Or the Super Nintendo games that came out, Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, stuff like that?
Nah, the only Star Wars games we had were the old Atari games that weren't really that good. So we're like, forget this. So it's...
Do you remember the arcade? Do you remember the arcade machine?
Yeah, actually, yeah. And I used to, when we'd go to the mall and, the arcade that was up there, I'd sometimes jump on that game. Or, I was actually kind of big on asteroids for some reason. I don't know why. I always just liked the, blowing stuff up. And that was always my game.
What I loved about the Star Wars game was also like this game Tail Gunner that they had. They had a cabinet version of the Star Wars game where you could get inside the cabinet. It felt like it was, I guess at that time, it was the closest thing to virtual reality. You felt like you were in an X-Wing and you were a part of fighting. And the PC games, the X-Wing game series, X-Wing, TIE Fighter and stuff like that, that was the stuff that became my continuation. That's where I started to feel like I was a part of the Star Wars world. And that's something, gaming, it's funny how my love and my continuing love for Star Wars really comes from the gaming end. There was a lot of just really great, on the PC end especially, great games. But those Super Nintendo games were incredibly challenging, but were gorgeous at the time because they went through each of the three movies. They did Super Star Wars, that one I was blown away by because at the time it like really pushed the envelope on the Super Nintendo end of things. And Super Empire Strikes Back, because it was a chance to play, again, really good games set in the film universe. But I remember Super Star Wars in particular being the standout of the one game where I was kind of like, wow, they accomplished this in a side-scroller. They did a really good job with that. I know you played Galaxies for a little while when they did Star Wars Galaxies, the MMO.
Not really. I think that was just a...
Did you do a trial?
I did, yeah. That's all I did was just the trial. I never really...
Then you jumped to City of Heroes?
Yeah, I jumped ship. I didn't stick with that at all.
Yeah, see, I liked Galaxies when it initially launched. For some reason, Galaxies for me, and I don't think I gave it enough of a chance, I enjoyed it for about the first year that it was out. My problem with MMOs, I think it's because I'm always doing other things, and this is no insult to anybody who likes MMOs. If I didn't have like a gaming ADD, like I like the story. So any of the games where I feel like I'm being immersed in a story, Like, it's funny, I'm still playing BioWare's The Old Republic. And the reason why is it's a spiritual sequel, not really a spiritual sequel. There's actually events from the other two Knights of the Old Republic BioWare standalone RPGs, that story elements that are in the MMO. But the cool part about BioWare's MMO is I really feel like there is a single player story that I'm following. I like the fact that if I happen to be playing for a day, you can do these big, huge missions where they're story driven, where you're interacting with other players, and your decisions, like you can fight to be either on the light side or the dark side. So you can be traveling along with people that you encounter along the way in the game. In one of these big missions, you get to vote on whether you do the good thing or the bad thing. And depending on how the role plays out, will greatly change the story that you're involved in. And I like that kind of stuff, where dark side things can happen in a light side, when you're a light side character. And the fact that the characters, through their morality, you'll actually see them, the dark side having an effect on their visual presence in the game. So I think that stuff's really cool, and I like story. I like when it's story-driven. Whereas I know there's a lot of friends of mine that I have that are really strong, really good MMO players that are into the whole player versus player stuff, and they get into the larger community aspect of it. I would love to do that. I'm just not good at it. It's one of those things where, like, I think if I got a few friends where we could say, like, every Wednesday night we're going to play this game, and not necessarily even just Star Wars. There's a few MMOs that I'm involved in that, like, like Champions and Star Trek Online, actually. I'm still playing that. Where if I had friends of mine that, like, wanted to take, like, our characters and only play these characters on this night of the week, and we could develop them together and go on missions together, and I think I could really get into that whole team aspect of the role-playing of the game. I would think I would really like that. Because on City of Heroes, I was a part of supergroups before you joined the game. Mm-hmm. And then when you joined the game City of Heroes, there was a Raging Bullets, which you actually got more into than I did. You were really doing a great job of leading that and having fun with that. That was already after I'd been playing the game for at least a good year before you joined on it, because I was in the beta of City of Heroes. But I liked it from that end. But I do think that's one of the reasons, like Galaxies, I think I was the problem with Galaxies. I never got into, and I never let myself get into the greater world that was being established there. But I did like my time with it. I spent a year with it. I remember I was in California when it first came out. I remember buying the collector's edition in California, and I was trying to install it on my buddy's machine. So, like, we'd go out and spend the whole day out, and I'm, like, at 2 in the morning, when my wife's falling asleep, when he's asleep, I'm on his machine trying to install Galaxies so I can at least try this game out, which is really nutty. And I really enjoyed that time with it. I enjoyed, creating my character, being a part of the world, traveling around. That was a game where I spent about a year with it, really enjoyed my time, but I didn't get into the greater, richer story of it. But gaming, for me, is what kept Star Wars going, and still does. I'm really excited for the new films. How do you feel about the Disney thing?
Oh, I'm excited for that because I'm going to start getting stories again.
Yeah.
And if they're able to get the original cast members in, wonderful. If they've got to do new cast members, hey, that's fine. I could handle somebody else playing Han Solo, even though Harrison Ford, will always be Han to me. I can handle that, but it depends on what story I get. Who gets the role. There's going to be a lot of. I'm definitely excited and looking forward to it because again, I'm getting more story. I've wanted more story since forever, and they stopped giving it to us after they gave us 1, 2, and 3. They stopped it. I'm like, come on, keep going. And yes, there's the Clone Wars cartoon, which for whatever reason I never got into. I never started watching it. I was just there was just some weird thing with the Star Wars universe. I kind of as every time they throw out, and then they kind of, he would tweak with it, and he'd fiddle with it, and I'm changing this little special effects. I'm changing how this appears. I'm doing a little bit more CGI in the backdrop here, and as it was going on, I'm like, okay, you keep making these little changes. Oh, here's a new version to buy. Here's a new, and I was like, okay, stop fiddling with it and give me some new content. And
that's my issue too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's funny because you're touching on a point that's interesting because I was going to ask you about those special editions and stuff. I never had a problem with them. Like some people, like, oh, he's broken the movies. They're basically the same movies. He's added little extras and stuff like that. I don't think the Darth Vader was necessary, but it also didn't ruin the film for me. I'm not one of those that's like, oh my gosh, this movie sucks now because of it. It doesn't. I mean, the tone's still the same. Vader saw his son being, shocked. And, he finally hit this point where he's like, I am still Anakin Skywalker in here. And it was at the end the realization that I can make the decision to be Anakin Skywalker in this moment. And that still pays off for me there. I think it was unnecessary, but I'm not like, oh my God, it's an abomination now. I've never been in that place with it. I just thought it was like you, it was more of a, but what about the new content? I want to see another movie. That was where I was always at. The prequel trilogy, the same way. It's really hard to take 4, 5, and 6 and try to outdo it. I think it's really hard to try to outdo it when you're not going to have the main cast as well. We all wanted to see more Luke, Han, and Leia. That's really what I wanted to see. I liked the prequel trilogy. I think the prequel trilogy, when you watch it with the 4, 5, and 6, I enjoy that experience of building to it. And the prequel trilogy kind of builds in the way that I enjoy the prequel trilogy. It starts with the first film, then the second film, and the third film, that's my enjoyment level of it. It just grows that way because then it leads to the events of Star Wars, and that's ultimately my end game is I want to get to that movie, which is so important to me. So it's funny how 4, 5, and 6 tend to be my standout movies. We never touched on that though. What is, do you have, what is your order? What is your order for those films?
See, for the longest time, my order, and this will anger people, was 6, 4, and 5. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, that was always, I always was, this was, The Return of the Jedi. That was this was a great movie. I could sit down and I could watch it multiple times. And it was, and then, the original, I'm like, the original Star Wars. And then 5 was like, 5 was kind of cool. There's some neat stuff to it. But for whatever reason, I don't know why, I think maybe it was when the movie came out or I still don't know why, but as a kid, I never really latched solid onto it. When they released one of the very first packs, it was a VCR pack of the 3 movies, I sat down one day and I watched them in order, 4, 5, 6, straight through. I had a Star Wars marathon. And it was at that point I was like, you know what? I got to change my opinion on Empire Strikes Back. Because I started to see all that stuff you were talking about, Empire. I'm like, I saw all that. I'm like, this is some, oh, wow, yeah, that's some really neat, especially the Luke and Leia moments. I was like, this is some cool stuff. And the training sequences and just everything that it was beyond the initial level of when I first perceived it as. And I think, it's kind of shifted my order too. In a way, I say, 5, 6, 4, but sometimes I'm actually 4, 5, 6 for my order. Just because of the growth and the development of the story along the process. If I had to pick an individual, you can only watch one movie, that's it right now, I probably would reach for Empire now. But if I had the choice of watching all 3 movies, say, okay, watch all 3 movies, I would definitely go 4, 5, 6, go in the order, just because of the progression of the story and of the characters. And I like seeing that growth of them.
I tend to typically, when I do sit down, I will definitely watch 4, 5, 6 in order. I put my ranking just because of, the heavy-hitting moments. I think that's where Empire wins for me. So I tend to go, my order tends to be 5, 6, and 4. That just tends to be, there's something about that battle between Vader and Luke and what it leads to.
Yeah.
That just really stands out for me. Plus the rescue of Han Solo. I just, after everything that happened in Empire Strikes Back, I so wanted to see that. And Empire so builds the emotion that leads me into Return of the Jedi. And I don't think it's a fault of 4. I think 4 was so crafted to be a standalone, not knowing what it would do, that it ended there and it didn't build my emotion the way that Empire did to Return. And that's not a fault of 4. I thought 4 was an incredibly well-crafted movie. I love 4. But 5 does what Wrath of Khan did for me in Star Trek for the best, link reference. It just made me so excited for the next film because it left so many dangling threads because they knew there's no way we're not doing a sequel, right? Because they knew, they knew that they had a successful franchise at that point. So that was really, in the 80s, to be a part of all that was just amazing. So then I guess, how do you put the original trilogy then? When I say the original trilogy, I'm sorry, the prequel trilogy.
Oh, for me, that's 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
And that's a very solid and again,
here's where I run into an issue. I kind of run into an issue with. But go ahead. I'm sorry, you had a thought you were going to go with.
Well, because I was like, how I said with 4, 5, 6, I'll watch them in that order. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I would do that with the prequels because it's for some reason I always kind of will drift away from it. I could maybe, if I'm sitting down watching, I could maybe go 2, 3, but if 3 for me is such a solid watchability. I think of the 3, I've seen 3 the most. Mm-hmm. I've seen that. I know I've seen that one a couple times, just because there was some great the birth of Vader moments. Just the nasty, the full turn of Anakin Skywalker. It's the movie that they set up from the beginning that the bad guys are going to win in the end, and they do.
There was so many moments in 3. I'm with you on that. I think what gives me a soft spot for 2. Being a Boba Fett fan, the stuff with Jango that went on in 2 and the introduction of Boba and how all that went down, I really have a soft spot for that. But I would agree with your order. If I'm watching them as single movies, I would go to 3 first because I want to see the choices that Anakin has to make. All of that stuff that the Emperor built to. There's actually some scenes that were cut that are baffling to me. You've seen the cut scenes, I'm assuming, with the formation of the rebellion and stuff like that. Do you understand to this day why those were cut? Like, the time thing, I just so don't buy. Do you feel those, especially the bits with Bail Organa and Padme, where they're sitting down and really it's the formation of the rebellion right there. Like, why on earth would you cut that out? That makes no sense to me.
And there was just so many sequences and so many just that they cut. I'm like, I don't get this. And it's usually almost, I think every time I've ever seen cut scenes from a movie, mm-hmm. I always end up saying, why did you cut this? You have no reason. There's no point to cutting this scene out of the movie. I don't care if it adds 10 seconds more to the movie or 5 minutes more. Guess what? This was a cool moment. This was something that would actually endear the people to the audience to these characters. This will develop the show and develop the movie. It annoyed me and it angered me, and again, it was part of anger that I would have towards the Star Wars universe is when I'd see these cut things, and and the first the conspiracy. I am at heart a conspiracy theorist, so whenever I see something that's cut and I see no reason why I cut it, the conspiracy theorist kicks in, and that part of me says, well, the reason he cut that out was so he could put it in later and sell it as another version of the movie. This is just his way of making a little bit more money, getting a little bit more change out of the fans. And that's always the first thing that pops in my head.
But that was never done.
No, it wasn't. But that's the first thing I thought in my head.
Right. See, and I think that should have been, because to me that scene was a pivotal link to her daughter in Episode 4. So I wished that had come about. But, I would go with you. I would say 3, 2, 1 on those. It's funny though, my preference on watching the movies is to do a marathon. I like to watch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's where 1 has value to me. When I can look at 1 and watch it as a prequel. 1 doesn't work as well for me as a standalone film. Honestly, it's not one of those where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to go watch Phantom Menace. I don't get into that place. But when I can watch all 6 of them together, I look at it as the introductory chapter of a book. You know what I mean? That chapter that you're kind of like, okay, this is setting a pace for me, setting some messages in there. I don't think it works as like one of the big chapters. It just really doesn't. But I can appreciate the introductory moments of 1. That's where it works for me. If I can then after that start watching Attack of the Clones, because it starts to feel like a build to a much larger 6-film story. it actually works for me there. I actually really do like all 6 films when you can watch them together. Then I like TV shows like The Clone Wars and stuff like that because we're getting more of the expansive story. But the preference that we're talking about with that is exactly we're on the same page with as far as the way that those films go.
I've never done 1 through 6 in one sitting.
Really?
I haven't done a marathon.
I haven't done it in one sitting, but what I've, over a couple of days, I've done it. Where, it's, maybe like on a Monday, I'll start watching 1, then I'll watch 2, part of 2, or some of it. So I've done that where I've, like, in the course of maybe a week, I've watched all 6 films in their order. And I like doing it that way. That's usually my preference in watching them. So I've got to say that I really enjoy that.
Part of me would actually like to do a one sitting run and actually, just go from beginning to end and just, take a break only to eat and, restroom breaks and just go from beginning, just see how it actually views.
Now, what are your hopes for? It's funny. Are you still like me? Like, I've seen so many release notes that say that Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher are a lock. But then every so often you see an article saying, well, but it hasn't been formalized yet. Are you still in the same confusion I am as far as are they actually in the film or not? It seems like Harrison Ford is from everything I'm seeing now. I'm still not 100% sure on Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. I feel like they're all going to be a part of this. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, I'm really confused by it. I don't know what they're in. It's one of those things where I'm just sitting back saying, okay, I'm going to wait until we get something more formal and concrete, and I'm thinking if Harrison Ford's definitely in, if Mark Hamill's if they're definitely in, they'll actually be on some interview talk show type environment and saying, yes, I am definitely in. Yes, I am signed up for this. Or IMDb will actually post it as confirmed. And, that type of, I'm waiting for that type of confirmation before I actually say, yay! Now, do I want them in it? Yes, I definitely want them in. If they're not in, will I still see it? Of course I'll see it. Yeah. Just because I want to see where the story goes, I want to see what happens. And I won't sit here yelling and complaining, oh, they shouldn't have done that. It happens. You can't always get the person you want, especially if, depending on where they want to tell the story. If they want to tell the story immediately after Return of the Jedi, you can't go with the original people.
The rumor is they're going to acknowledge the age of the characters.
Yeah.
And I don't know how true this rumor is, but the idea of having the original actors come in is that they're going to play at the age that they are. Or, relatively. There's going to be obviously a sense of progression. But then we're also going to be dealing with the children.
See, that'd be great. I would love to see, a story where it's the children of, Han and Leia, and it's maybe Luke's kids, or, just, them dealing with some situation where they have to rise up and they have to deal with it, and you get moments of the parents' interactions with the parents doing something. It's, for me, the one character that has to be in there is R2. He's got to be in there. He's been in them all. He's got to, we need one more,
Now, how are you on, what do you want for R2's age progression? Do you want him to have kids, or? I'm kidding.
R2 and C3, and 3PO have to be in it.
Right. I agree.
They got to be in the movie and I would have them going along with the kids. I could see Luke telling R2, hey, keep an eye on my son, or keep an eye on my daughter, whichever the case may be. And, having, them sending, hey, 3PO, go with them, and just have them be the connection. Even if the original cast aren't the main characters in the movie, if they're supporting characters,
right,
I'd be okay with that. Because, again, it's a progression of story. It would make sense. Now, if you have Han Solo in the movie, you got to pull out the Falcon. And you just think about just the great big final fight sequence. In comes the Millennium Falcon, Han and Chewie at the helm, Leia, riding shotgun, maybe support gun. You pull in, even some Lando action. You can do a lot of different stuff, and you can have that moment of it riding in, at the last minute for the save, like they did in the first movie. There's so many different things that you could do where it's a nod to the original stories but a progression and a confidence in your current cast.
Now, how beholden should the film be? Like, for example, I've heard one of the rumors I've heard, and these are rumors, so anything I'm throwing out about this film that, coming up, episode 7, that I'm throwing out is just stuff that I've read online. So you got to take some of it with a grain of salt, as I do. But like everybody else out there who gets into geeky news, I like following this stuff. I tend to be pretty good at like saying, okay, this could be completely misguided or it could be very true. I guess the one rumor is that the lead would be, the child would be a female child of Leia and Han Solo. Mm-hmm. And I guess there's been speculation then amongst the fan community when that was mentioned, I don't know if that's still even in the heads of people, that this might be tied into the expanded universe. Or I guess there would be a hope of that. How beholden do you think a film series needs to be to an expanded universe in novels and stuff like that? Like, the Star Wars universe in particular has had a very well organized, at least from my experience in reading, I haven't read everything, but when you look at the comics and the novels that I've read, they seem to be relatively cohesive. There's occasionally a contradiction here and there, but it's pretty well, timeline-wise spread out. So this feels like a big, largely developed, rich history going all the way back to well before when the films would take place, to some of the future as well. Do the films, in your mind, have to be beholden to that? Or should they be beholden to that, kind of focusing on the fan community? What is your thoughts on that? Where do you usually lie?
See, usually I would say no. I would say, usually I would say you have your film Unity, you have that going on, and you keep that. Star Wars is the exception I make to my usual rule. Huh. And one of the reasons I make that is because there was such this long gap of nothing from them, that the fan community took it upon themselves to build this and to let this grow and say, this is what happened. This is where, the universe went. And to a point where the original creators started acknowledging some of the stuff, saying, yeah, that did occur. Yeah, I like how that story is played out. I like, because especially, the Zahn series, it was acknowledged that, yes, this is now canon. This has actually occurred in this universe. And there was a respect towards the story that was told. So for stuff like that, I definitely think they need to acknowledge that. They need to say, yes, this is part of the Star Wars universe. And I think if they don't do it, they will be angering and annoying their fan base. The people who are going to go out and buy these tickets multiple times, the people who are going to wait in line to see the next Star Wars movies, want this continuity. They want this thing. So if you're sitting there saying, everything you worked so hard for, everything you supported doesn't mean nothing, they're going to say, fine, your story doesn't mean nothing. We'll keep on our fantasy world that we've created. We like this world. We're going to keep it, and we're going to keep going with it. Forget you. And Star Wars really needs to say, yes, they're in control of it, but they need to recognize that the fan community kept this going for so long that if they don't acknowledge that, if they don't recognize that and respect that, they're going to hurt themselves.
Well, I know Lucasfilm was heavily involved in what could and could not be done in the novels and in comics and in games. Mm-hmm. And I know there was some, there's contradiction here and there, especially as the universe expanded and stuff like that. But, it really is pretty well crafted on that end, and I'm with you. I guess I would add one small disclaimer on that, though. I don't know that they necessarily have to go out of their way to fully acknowledge all of that stuff. I think the better trick is making sure you don't contradict it. I think you can tell your own story in a way where you're not contradicting that, so that way you're not, because you don't want to alienate a fan base that's only watched the films. So you don't want to put in a whole bunch of stuff where it's like you had to have read these books to be a part of it. But I think there's a way to do that. A great example would be Doctor Who, when they've done this revival of Doctor Who. They've done a really brilliant job of occasionally bringing in a guest star or a character that the Doctor traveled with in the past. But they also don't force this sense that you had to have watched any of the previous Doctor Who in order to be a part of all that. Now, if you're a geeky fan who is a part of all that, when you see a Sarah Jane Smith come back into Doctor Who and you grew up watching Tom Baker, there is so much power, and John Pertwee, there's so much power to that character and her rich history with Doctor Who. That's awesome. But yet the story is just as moving because of her interactions with Rose and what happens with all that. I think that there's a way to do that in the Star Wars films where you can say, okay, look, there's been some canon established here that really, when there was no new media coming in, if we can avoid contradicting this stuff, we should. Now, on the other hand, if they've got this amazing film story idea that's going to be mind-blowingly cool, is it okay for them to say, you know what, this part here is going to become the new canon, and sorry, it's going to bump out that old one? I don't have a huge problem with that, even if I read the book and it's really important to me. But when you look at a thing like the Zahn trilogy, and I'm with you on this one, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people listening here saying that they've read a lot more of the books than I have, that are pulling out specific storylines like, I really don't want this contradicted. This one's really important to me. I think there's something to be said for, with how vast that universe is, there's ways to tell new stories with these characters without contradicting what's happened in other media. I think there's ways to do it, and I'd like to see them do that. I don't think they have to acknowledge it in the sense that they have to bring those things in, but they can craft a story that doesn't contradict so that way people can feel that there's a continued value in supporting that external media. Like, when those films come out, I know I'm already Star Wars happy right now, as I'm mentioning. I'm enjoying Knights of the Old Republic. I'm enjoying the comics. I've got that Scoundrels book I'm going to read. So I'm into the universe. But I've got to admit, compared to somebody who's a super diehard Star Wars fan, I don't read every little thing, even though I consider myself a Star Wars guy. I wish I had the time to, because I would, if I had the time to, admittedly, because I like the stuff that I'm reading. But I in support of those fans, I think those people want to know that there's a value to keep reading any book that you put out, any, external thing, any comic that comes out and things like that. You have to go out of your way to, I think, not go out of your way. I think there's clever ways without going out of your way that you don't contradict that stuff. Because I know that stuff's already mapped out, so I think it should be pretty easy to make slight little tweaks to make sure you don't contradict something, hopefully without ruining your story, because I think the story in the film has to come first. That would be my only caveat there. What do you think about comics now? Because Dark Horse has had such a rich history in the comics. Do you think that the Star Wars comics, I'm guessing they're going to eventually go to Marvel? Because I know Dark Horse has the license for a certain amount of time, but I'm assuming that they would eventually go to Marvel. Do you think that Marvel should be acknowledging the stuff that Dark Horse created and not contradict that stuff?
Yeah. I think unless they're going to announce it as a full-on reboot and just completely upfront say issue 1, do like a Marvel Now kind of story where Star Wars now. And not just completely wipe everything out. They need to acknowledge what came before it. I would like to see them acknowledge what came before it, just because, again, it's a nod to all the people who bought that stuff before, all the people who, invested so much of their time, their money, and just everything into following that series. If the new series is coming out and they're not going to acknowledge it, you're like, hey, why should I support you?
Right.
You're not supporting me. You're not being, this is a two-way street here. You want me to support this new series. Well, guess what? Don't tell me I just wasted all my time. Let me keep going. That was something that, when the new DCU came out, that a lot of people were upset about the fact that they were losing their continuity. They were losing everything they did, and that was one of the big arguments. I think that's something, a very similar argument would happen on the Star Wars side. Because again, the fan community has kept this series alive. They're the ones who are shelling out the money, who are, openly seeking other avenues because the main body wasn't giving them what they wanted.
Here's the funny part. If they found a clever way to do it, I would support it, and I would think that would be great. I would prefer they don't, because to me it's kind of like Star Trek already did it and did it so well. As far as Star Trek found a clever way to reboot, while at the same time not slapping it. Everything happened that we read and watched, in Star Trek. And that works. But I think it's funny. I don't know that Star Wars can do it now because Star Trek did it. Do you follow me on that one?
Yeah.
It's funny. Flashpoint did the same thing for me. I think the reason why I don't think the DC reboot for me has been as hard for me is I look at the whole old universe in DC as happening. Everything that I've read before has happened. Then Flashpoint happened, and kind of like what happened with Star Trek, this new continuity takes place in a parallel timeline, because of that shift that happened there. Star Trek did that so well with the film, where the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, all those in the original series, all that stuff actually happened. But because of what happened with Spock and Spock having to come here and him being followed, how all of that played out in the film. It's funny how in Star Trek it just all works so well for me, because I'm with you. I was a big fan of the Star Trek television series. And I'm talking about Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. When that stuff was all going on, it was like, whoa. And I was watching Babylon 5 during that time. So as a sci-fi fan, you know, as Next Generation became more and more popular and led to a Deep Space Nine spinoff that, you know, would occasionally have guest appearances from Next Gen. I remember in high school, remember going over to Bill's house, and watching on Saturday nights Star Trek? Yeah. And then there would be like that cliffhanger at the end. Remember Data, like finding his head in the future, or the past? It was the past, wasn't it? The Old West or something? And then they had to didn't they have to dig his head up in the future? Am I remembering the story right?
Well, that was actually when we were in college. That whole Data story happened when we were in college.
So we started watching some of it, I guess. Did we watch some of it in high school and then continue watching it into college? Is that how that played out?
Yeah,
because Gladiators and stuff like that were on during that time as well, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because it came out when our junior year in high school is when it was the Farpoint station episode. So episode 1 of Next Generation was our junior year.
And that stuff was, I mean, terrific. I mean, that show, and that was a show, I don't know if you felt this way, I felt that show only got better as it went along. Like, I loved it from the beginning, so it's not a knock on it. It's, if anything, I think taking that concept. I remember seeing that Enterprise for the first time, though, when they first kicked that off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is that cool. I'm a big fan of, in sci-fi, gadgets and gizmos. Still a big fan of gadgets and gizmos today. But I loved, as a kid growing up, the idea of being on the Enterprise in the sense that this ship was huge. It had different rooms. And that, you know, translates to Star Wars to things like the Millennium Falcon. It's funny, the bigger ships where you had this sense of you could move around and go to places, but yet this thing was taking you through space. It gives you this sense of security and wonder and exploration. And I thought Next Generation really brought that back. You know, this sense of adventure and exploration, and yet it was touching on really intelligent themes. The deep political structure of the Star Trek universe from a military standpoint. The fact that there are alliances to be made with people that the Federation has tentative agreements with, and the Federation could go to war at any point in time because these alliances are so fragile. And you'd have, like, you know, that's where characters like Worf, you know, who started off very small in the series and gradually became like a major player where you were just like, more Worf, please, and you wanted to see Worf spin off, which he did. It was, but then you wanted him to see spin back in when the movies came out. You know, those characters like that were just so amazing to me. And I liked the fact that as the series progressed, you saw characters like Wesley Crusher leave and be replaced by other characters. But there was a storytelling reason that all that happened. Denise Crosby's character, again, another one that ended up leaving during the show, but then was replaced by another character, which would be something that would happen. You'd have your major players who stuck around, like Picard and Riker and Troy and stuff like that, but then you would have characters who, like, were replaced by other characters who would become just as important. But that new character, because they're a new part of your squad, a new part of your ship, a new part of your crew, would add something new to the dynamic, would shake things up. And you'd have to see, can this person belong? Can this person be a part of this crew? You know, when they would encounter their family or encounter a religious difference or, you know, some kind of political difference that would put them at odds with potentially the philosophy of the Federation, they would have to make a decision about their loyalties to the next-gen crew and to the Federation in general and their own people. Sometimes in a 2 or 3 episode arc, their loyalties would shift one way and the other and back again, and you could see how that left a conundrum for the leader, Picard and Riker, a lot of times, as far as, can you trust this person? Can they be a part of the crew? The deep, rich nature of that show and its special effects. I liked that it had a tremendous special effects with the holodeck and everything that it was doing, but the special effects were an enhancement to the incredible story that was being told. They did not overtake the story. There's a balance there that needs to be maintained. I think Lucas did a good job with this in his films, and I think it's been something that Star Trek has always done a good job with. Never letting the special effects be more than the story. You want the special effects to make you feel like the world is rich and as real as possible, to feel like you could push the buttons, and you want to push the buttons. You want to be sitting at one of those consoles. You want to be looking out at that view screen. You want to be on the holodeck. But you want to be there because all of these characters and their experiences make you want to be there. And you want to be there with them.
Oh, God, yeah. And one of the reasons that, for me, I am a Star Trek guy is because of Next Generation and the growth and the development. I remember when, Commander Hormone first came on the scene, I was like, what are they doing? They got to have the Kirk element, but they didn't want the captain to be this way. Oh, okay. But as his character, as he started to develop, I'm like, okay, Riker's a pretty cool guy. I dig Riker. All right. And he, growth and development right there. Data, same thing. Pinocchio, when he first came out, I was like, okay, what are they going to do with this? And then as it's going along, like, okay, this is a neat person. And Geordi, and, I can start going through the list of every one of the characters had that growth and that development. And they'd throw in, they'd have a recurring character, in Reg. Dwight Schultz, his character coming in every so often.
Murdoch.
There's some funny stuff going on there. And as you have these funny moments, you have serious moments, you have these political discussions, and just this debate is what is right, what is wrong, what's the moral implications on this. I remember the one episode, and I can't think of the name of it, but you had the two dramatic societies where the one was quote unquote sick and the other one had the cure, and they realized they're not sick, they're just going through detox. This other society is just feeding the drug, just feeding, the addiction. And they're like, hey, we're just going to, adhere to the Prime Directive and say, we're not going to get involved in your society. We'll see what happens. And they just stepped away because the one society was taking advantage of the other one. Even though the others didn't realize what was going on, they're like, hey, we're going to see how this plays out. And there have been a bunch of episodes where they danced on that gray line. They're like, okay, what do we do here? What's right? What's wrong? The one where we almost lost Wesley, with the society where if you break one simple rule, one simple law, you step on the grass and you're not supposed to, they kill you instantly. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no gray area. You're either guilty or innocent, and you're dead. And Wesley didn't realize this, and he walked across the lawn or stepped on some flowers, and they're like, okay, we're going to kill you now. What the hell? And just, this is their laws. This is how they live their life. Can they interfere? Should they interfere? And I know there was probably a lot of people who were probably yelling, no, let the kid die! Because Wesley was one of those characters that when he first kind of came on the scenes, I found him very annoying. But as his character grew, as he matured as a person, by the end of the movies, by the end of the final movies, I was like, man, I wish they had Wesley on here. I would have loved to see Wesley make that final appearance, in one of the movies, just to, kind of give him a swan song and him a farewell on the series.
Guinan, the lore, the Borg, Q, so many. I could keep going on and on. So many elements to the series that I thought just made it fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Next Generation. It's funny, my love for I have trouble deciding, is just like I have the trouble deciding between Star Trek and Star Wars. I have trouble deciding between the Next Generation and the original series as far as which is my favorite, for very different reasons. And Kirk or Picard. The problem with them is they're so drastically different that there's such a validity to what was done with Picard that I liked when we got to see them teamed up in Generations. It's funny. It's going to seem strange. I don't know if you read any of Shatner's books, like Bringing Back Kirk, but I liked what Shatner was doing because when he brought back Kirk, there was opportunities for Kirk and Picard to be together again, and those worked really well. So, I don't know. I really have found that I like both series. But the Next Generation, I think from a community aspect, I greatly and fondly remember the times we as a group were able to, for those few years we were able to do it, to sit down on Saturday nights watching the show. And when there was a cliffhanger that was important, I was dating someone at the time who was a Star Trek fan. Those were things that was really a cool aspect about it that you don't get very often in a show, especially when it's a sci-fi show, because I don't have a lot of memories of sci-fi being a big community thing. It is now. I think we have, there's been so many conventions and then fan communities on the internet and stuff like that. But do you remember growing up, like having Star Wars was more of the community stuff on my end than Star Trek was. Star Trek was more of an isolated thing. It was almost like people, I think, were afraid to admit that they liked Star Trek until The Next Generation. Next Generation, I think, made Star Trek mainstream. And the films, like Wrath of Khan and stuff like that, I think started to make Star Trek more mainstream. But it was kind of, you were really looked at as super geeky if you were a Star Trek fan, whereas Star Wars, for some reason, was a lot more acceptable.
Oh, definitely. And I think part of it was because of the appearance of the original series. Just when you watch it, when we grew up, the original series had been long off the air.
Yeah.
So you have the technology, you have the that was developed and available at that time up against modern media. And so people would look down at Star Trek saying, oh, look at that. It's a cheesy looking show. Why are you watching that? And that was the negative stereotype. And then as the movies came out, the special effects improved. When Next Generation came out, the special effects were improved. Now people still looked at you kind of like a geek, and you didn't really completely openly walk around with your Star Trek shirt on when you went to class or whatnot. But there was a little bit more of acceptance in it, and it's even nowadays there is a little bit more acceptance in it. Now, whenever people start talking geek, especially at work, they'll sit there and they'll, I get the nice caveat of just insults that come my way because I am such a geek, because I am, a sci-fi guy. So whenever these movies come out, they'll make little comments. Oh, you got to have your phaser out. Are you going to be in uniform? You wear Spock ears, and you get the nice little ribbing, and it goes on back and forth. But there is more of an acceptance of the culture, I would say. But there is that acceptance, but there is that limit. When you get the people who are so enveloped and so into the culture that, they're every day walking around in their regulation uniform, and those kind of people are still looked at in a downward way. They're still looked at in a negative side of it. But just a general fan, even a passionate fan, it's still accepted, and it's now, I think, and it's, I don't know, I think it's just because of the medium and because of everybody. We're seeing just so much more connection with our media, with our TVs, with our movies, and just an integration.
Voyager, DS9, and Enterprise, would follow up either during or after, in the case of Voyager, after Next Generation. Where do those fall for you? Because I liked all those series for very different reasons. Voyager, Deep Space Nine, I should probably start with first. Deep Space Nine, because it was set on a space station, and we're going to have to go through these kind of quickly because I do want to talk about the newer stuff and get to it. We could almost do a follow-up and do a whole other, discussion about, because this stuff is so geeky cool, and there's so much more about Star Wars I'd love to talk about too. But I do want to make sure, seeing as we talked a little currently about Star Wars, I'd like to do a little bit with Star Trek as well. DS9, the setting with the space station, there was such a different tone there. I loved Sisko. I loved, we've got a Ferengi running a shop down there. I mean, who didn't love him? The whole idea of these, Bajor for the Bajorans and all that stuff. I really enjoyed everything that was played out in DS9. That was, I think, one of the more political Star Trek shows in the way that it played out. It was funny how there was, for a while there, that controversy with that and Babylon 5. Watching both shows, they couldn't have been more different, and that's a compliment to both programs. I thought their strong character development and great series development of both shows really quickly separated the two from me, other than the fact that they both took place on space stations. That was really all, in my mind, that felt similar between the two. That was, which is what's great about sci-fi, the ability of creators to take similar concepts. But where were you on, DS9?
Okay, I'm about to anger my brother. So, Bill, if you're driving while listening to the podcast, you may want to pause because you're about to scream. First off, for me, there's no question. Next Generation beats out the original generation, hands down. And when I look at DS9, my passion and fire for DS9 is equally to what I have for Next Generation. And when you throw out Babylon 5, I'm going to take DS9 over Babylon 5 any day of the week.
Wait,
and
how much of B5 did you watch?
I will admit I have not seen everything from Babylon 5.
Then you can't, you know what? I'm going to say right now we need to take Babylon 5 out of it because I will not accept that as an answer if you didn't watch all of Babylon 5. Now, wait, hold on. First of all, that's not to diminish Deep Space Nine. The story that was told in Babylon 5 was such a large, overarching story that really spanned the entire series that, like, to even try to compare the two is like, I'm going to start yelling at you.
Okay.
I'm going to be 100% honest with you. If you'd seen all of Babylon 5 and you said the same thing to me, I would respect your decision there. But it's because they're really crafted so differently. Deep Space Nine did a wonderful job of having this big overarching story while still feeling very episodic. Babylon 5 was not a series you could jump on in the middle. It was also not a series that you could only watch 1 or 2 seasons and get the understand Babylon 5. And I don't mean that as a knock. It's not a knock on your intelligence. I don't mean it as a knock on you in any way. It was one of those, being a big fan of it, the Babylon 5, and I'm going to get off my soapbox in 2 seconds with this one because it doesn't really fit here. But the only reason why I brought it up is because it happened to be airing at the same time, and there was that controversy that one stole from the other, and I just don't, as a compliment to both series and to everyone creating both series, I just so don't see that as being the case because they couldn't have been more different in their presentation. And I'm speaking as a geeky fan of your love for Deep Space Nine that you're talking about, I share. So I'm saying everything I'm saying about Babylon 5 while also adamantly defending Deep Space Nine. I really, as a geeky fan watching sci-fi programming at that time, I think sci-fi could not have been better in that era than it was. So I don't know that we want to get into a B5 DS9 debate right now because I will scream.
And I'm not going to, and I will... What you said is what I did. I jumped in the middle, and I only caught like maybe 1 or 2 seasons of it. So So I will completely retract any comments I made about Babylon 5 versus DS9 because I don't have enough of a history on Babylon 5. I mostly said that just to anger my brother because that's fun for me.
I would honestly love it if there was a way, if we had the time to do it, where you and I could sit down and watch both series and have a serious debate over it where we could watch all of it and really have that debate. I would love to have it. And respecting you the way that I do, even if you at the end of that felt the same way that you were just stating beforehand, I would love to have that debate from a standpoint of you had watched it and we could come at it from that kind of tete-a-tete on it. I think that would be a lot of fun. We can't go there right now because that tells you how much I love B5 because I know I will start taking us in a direction we don't want to go in right now. So let's take that off. Let's take that off the table and say if we ever have time, it'd be a fun podcasting thing to do.
Oh yeah, that actually would be cool. And as we're talking, just DS9, as I said, I've got that same passion and fire for DS9 that I have for Next Generation. Now, all the series after DS9, I don't have as strong a fire for. Voyager and Enterprise, I don't have as strong of connection and I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. I enjoyed those series and I watched them when they came out. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm glad to see it. But by the time they were done, I'm like, okay, these are done now. So when the whole reboot happened, I was glad to see it. Because we had reached a point on the TV series, I'm like, okay, the different Star Trek TV series had reached a point where they needed to light the fire. They needed to relaunch. They needed this reboot. They needed this energy from the new movies. And it's, like as I said, not knock on those shows. They were good shows. They just didn't have that same fire and passion for them. So when the new movie came out, I was very happy with it. And again, statement that's going to anger the original series fans, especially my brother. I like the reboot, on equal level is the original series. I think we're getting that same type of style. Now, granted, the original series does have it is the original. It is the birth. It is the creation of everything that is the Star Trek universe. So you can't take away from it. But this retelling, this reimagining, this recreation of the universe, for me, is equally satisfying. Oh, I'm liking this.
Wait, I would agree with you, and I'm actually, to say we're a little different here, I prefer the original crew. So I'm in that camp. My love for, it's funny how as I got older, I ended up, like I said, I mentioned as a kid, the Joan Collins episode of Star Trek being the one that started to do the turnaround. But then gradually, as I was growing up, I became more and more of a fan of the original series and the original cast, especially with the films and stuff like that. And then I went back and started to become a real big fan of the reruns of the television series. I would say, and I want to say this cautiously because I love The Next Generation that much. I share your feelings about Voyager and Enterprise. I enjoyed both series, but it wasn't the same pop for me. Other than there were some, I thought Kate Mulgrew was an excellent captain, and I thought that the whole 7 to 9 thing was cool. I liked Tuvok. So there's stuff that I really liked about Voyager. There was stuff that I really liked about Enterprise, but it wasn't to the same level where I would be debating it the way I would Next Gen versus Original Gen. And I think there's a definite debate to be had there. I can totally respect you saying I connected more with the Next Gen crew because I thought the show was that good. I agree with you. The original crew, for some reason, I've just got that affinity for them, that love for them. I agree with your comments about the film. The idea of recasting these characters with how important they were to me is one where I'm like, I just don't know how it can be that good. Then I saw the film. I got the same goosebumps that I got from the better Star Trek films from the original cast and crew. There was something about those films that really had a pop. That film, I should say, that really had a pop. I remember the Countdown comic coming out, leading up to it, showing how the two universes were connected. Then there's a comic going on right now by IDW, their ongoing series. And the cool part about the ongoing series now is what they did in the first few arcs was they took original series episodes in 2-part issues. They were telling, like the Gary Mitchell stuff, remember that from the classic series? Do you remember any of that? They retold that in the new universe with the changes that are in the new universe. So they started taking episodes from the original series saying, well, okay, seeing as this is that universe running parallel with what happened there because Spock went back in time, what would happen now with the relationships being what they are? There's something so cool about seeing situations where Spock needs to be rescued and Uhura has that relationship with him. And just seeing these different moments where, Spock gets infected. Now, he and Uhura have to deal with the fact that in multiple situations, Spock's putting his life at risk. What does that mean for this guy? Being that he is, look what happened with Vulcan and his people. Yeah. So that adds a whole little twist in that. It's a different sort of relationship. And Kirk's relationship with Spock is very different, considering what we know about Spock being groomed as potentially being the captain. Now Kirk's in that spot. That dynamic being brought into these original episodes, I think the comic has done a great job of that. So I'm a geeking out as an original series fan, seeing this new cast and crew and having them have an opportunity to go through some of the stories. But then the cool thing about the IDW ongoing, for anyone that's not reading it, they also do issues where they're original stories that further the storyline. So they're working closely on the film end of things to not obviously go to places that the second film's going to go. But you talked about the long stretch with Star Wars. There's been a pretty big stretch between the first of these new films and now the new one we're getting this summer. So I've been liking the stuff we've been getting gradually along the way. They haven't been overdoing it, but this stuff that really feels like I'm still getting storytelling that's progressing these characters and putting them in a place. I already pre-ordered the game. There's a game coming out this month based on the movie. It's going to be one of those third-person shooters, where you're behind the character. You can play as either Kirk or Spock, and the game plays very differently depending if you play as Kirk or Spock. Because, with Spock having, the various Vulcan things that he can do. I love the idea that that's going to make the game play differently because you're going to be able to, who doesn't want to sneak up behind somebody to the Vulcan nerve pinch, right? But this story's supposed to be a prequel to the movie in the game. So I'm going to be able to play a game and lead it up into the film. Go ahead.
Yeah, that sounds cool. It's with me and games. I don't know. I don't have that same connection that you have with the games, but I would want to know the story that's told in the game. I would want to read or see or something that is the what's supposed to play out in the game actually, in a story form of some format. Ideally, I think an animated version of it would be kind of neat. I've always thought that with any of these games where they really have a detailed story, I wish they could just publish out something that tells.
They do that sometimes. Star Wars in particular has done that with some of the games.
Yeah,
there was an N64 game, and I'm so drawing a blank on it right now, and I apologize, where I played the game. I didn't read. There was a comic adaptation of it, and then there was a novelization of it. And I didn't read either, only because I played the game, and I just liked experiencing the story that way. But it addresses what you're saying, and it'd be cool if the game, winds up being successful and it leads to a comic book or a novel adaptation for people such as yourself who would like to read or experience the story that way. Or like you said, in anime, sometimes nowadays they've started taking cutscenes from films and releasing them. I mean, from games, I should say. Cutscenes from games and releasing them in a way that makes it kind of coherent in a film format. And that would be kind of a cool way to do it, too, for people such as yourself. I like experience it in the game. So for myself, that's my preference when it's a game. And I like sometimes enjoy seeing an extension of the game in a book form, meaning like where would the game go from there or what led up to the game in a book. That's kind of the way I prefer experiencing that because I'm going to play the game. But I'm with you. It's great to have that playing field where maybe you and I could talk about the story. I played the game. You read the game, if that makes sense. And it kind of connects the fan community that way. So it'd be cool to see if that kind of stuff happens. Because I'm a fan of it from that perspective because it kind of puts us on the same page. That's really cool. How excited are you for the new film?
I'm definitely excited for us. And, this will be another, probably opening weekend. This won't be an opening night for me because those are really hard for me to do with work. But definitely would be an opening weekend. Maybe with the new Star Wars movie, if it ever comes out, depending on who it is and whatnot, that may be an opening night.
It's J.J. Abrams is the director.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a... Does that matter to you? That's the same director that's been doing these new Star Treks?
It helps, but it's another one of those things where that's one of the reasons it'll be an opening weekend for me because it is, J.J. Abrams, because I really enjoyed what he did the last time, and I know... I'm assuming I'm going to get the same quality that I had before, so I'm like, okay, he gets the universe that I enjoy, so let me keep watching it. But it takes a lot for me to do an opening day, for me to say yes, I'm going to do the the midnight showing and be a complete zombie the next day at work. It takes a lot to get me to do that.
It doesn't for me.
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you, I am like so geeked out, other than the sense that I am a little more conservative about it now in the sense that it's got to be a film that I'm really looking forward to, except I got to say, with the amount of geek culture stuff that's being put out right now, there's very few, like Avengers, is a midnighter for me. This Star Trek is definitely going to be a midnighter for me. The Dark Knight and all, I mean... And it's one of those films, this Star Trek, unless you'd have to try to screw this up because it's on paper, it's looking to be amazing. This is going to be a summer of a few midnight showings for me. There's Iron Man, there's Man of Steel. I mean, not only will I see the midnight shows of those, these are definitely at least 2 on the big screen viewings, those films. Because it's an experience that you can't get at home. I'm a big believer in the big screen with it when it's epic movies like this that are shot that way. And Star Trek will definitely be a more than one viewing on the big screen.
Oh, yeah. And what it'll end up being is you'll see it opening night, and then the next day you'll go with me.
Oh, gladly. And any time I would gladly do that. Because I love the camaraderie of going to see a movie with friends, being able to do it. Because I think, these type of things... The emotional experience of like when you walk out of a film like this, of this quality afterwards, and you can just kind of, even if you don't say anything, you just know, like you can do the nod and the high five, the fist pump, whatever you want to call it when you're walking out, phasers on stun or whatever. Those moments are things that like it's an unspoken sharing, knowing that you're there with people that understand what you just experienced. You don't necessarily always have to talk about it. It's being there with a group of people. I like the midnight shows because usually those are the diehard fans. I've never been one, and this is not me sticking my nose up in the air. I've never been a costume kind of guy. but I like and appreciate people that are into it. So that's why I'm saying I want to be really careful here that I'm not snooty about it. I like being around people that are that into it. You know, from people that'll wear t-shirts. Like I'm a t-shirt guy. I love wearing t-shirts relating to geek culture. So like, you know, I'm going to be there at the midnight showing, hopefully wearing a Star Trek t-shirt, you know, something to show my allegiance to the film series and stuff like that. And enjoying anybody that, you know, brings props or, you know, dresses up or whatever. And hopefully they'll be allowed to, you know, with how crazy things are now. I'm hoping that doesn't ruin the whole costuming, you know, dressing up, cosplay kind of thing that was there. That's always been, I think, a part of geek culture because it's innocent, it's fun, it's people expressing themselves and just kind of really enjoying the media. That's kind of my worry with the craziness in our world today. Is that, you know, you're going to wind up where movie theaters can't let people do that kind of stuff or can't let people bring those kind of things, the harmless stuff to the film. And it's I think it's kind of a sad state of affairs because I'm really excited to be a part of this film. I'm excited to go in the midnight showing and just be sitting there with people. There's so many people listening to this right now that I wish I could be hanging out with there, including you. You know, it's and I'm the goofy one that like I will come home from work because I won't take a day off after it because you know I'm a teacher. I've got my job and my responsibilities, stuff like that. I'll come home and take a nap, go to the film, take another nap, and teach because you know I want to still do my job and all that stuff. Plus, you know I'm in a career where for other reasons too I would get in a little bit of trouble because everyone knows that's why I took the day off, right? I mean, you know, like I don't exactly hide that I like this stuff. But, you know, I don't mind that. I think, you know, I don't mind going home from work and, you know, preparing during the week and saying I'm going to make sure I get all my paper grading done before that night. So that way when that night rolls around, I can go and take my nap and I'm still keeping in with my professional responsibilities. For some reason, after those films, after I see them, I'm excited to go to work the next day because I'm real happy, which is good for my kids. You know, my students it's good for, I'm never dead the next day when I go to work. For some reason, those geeky movies get me excited to go see them again. So I'm usually on the next day at work. Now, the Saturday, I'm usually dead. But for some reason, the Friday, I never am, which works out kind of well. I think if I ever went to work dead after going to one of those things, I would probably be in the same place you are, where you know, so I totally get why you're saying I can't do that. It just doesn't work for me. I don't have that kind of experience with it, so I get excited to go to another one. I think if I ever started having that where it would be something that could affect my job, then I would stop doing the midnight shows. I just like them too much, though.
Yeah. And the couple ones that I've gone to, I've enjoyed it. And with the Superman coming out, I'm thinking about maybe doing a midnight show for that one just because it is Superman. You know, I don't know. It's part of me. I sit there and I painstake over. I'm like, I should have gone. That would have been cool. Oh, man. Oh, and then the next day when I'm at work, you know, I get approached by half a dozen people. Wow, you're doing pretty good. Didn't you go to the midnight show? I'm like, no, I didn't go. What? What, you feeling okay? And I get the exact same reaction every time from the people. Like, what are you feeling okay? Yeah, how come you didn't do that? You know, just like, guys, I got to do this. You know.
What are your hopes for, you know, with Star Trek and Star Wars? Well, I guess we've established from this you're more of a Star Trek guy, right? You're pretty comfortable saying that.
Oh yeah.
I'm still so on the fence. I guess I would lean a little bit more towards Star Wars, maybe. But it's certainly not, I'm not digging my heels in because I do, the original crew of Star Trek I love immensely. I love Next Gen. So I even have a tough time saying that I like one of those more than the other. So I guess I'm going to be a little wishy-washy from it, only because I think the quality of all of it's so good, and I think it's so different. I think if Star Wars was a clone of Star Trek, or felt more like a clone, I would have an easier time of comparing the two. But I think they're so vastly different, and I get such a different emotional reaction from both. And I've got to be in a very different mood for both. That's why I'm having a tough time deciding which one of the two is my favorite. But I have a question that this is leading to. With the future of these franchises, you know, Star Trek's now become a very successful film franchise again. It's become a powerhouse. I know we didn't get a chance to talk much about the Next Generation films, but I think we've both really enjoyed the film aspect of Star Trek. But it's kicked back up again to a certain notch that it hasn't been at in a while. Star Wars, I'm assuming this new one on paper right now, it looks like it's going to be a home run. From time to time, television seems to be popping up, especially now. Star Wars has been rumored for the longest time to have a live-action series that's been in development. That rumor creeps up. It drifted when Disney bought them, but now it's crept up again. I don't know where that's at. I don't know if that's going to wait now to be under consideration after the film. You know, like let's do this film. Let's build on the excitement of this film. And if it looks like it's the right time to pop for another live-action series, maybe. Star Trek, same thing. You know, you hear rumors, especially lately, of a potential live-action television series again. What are your feelings? Should they go live-action, either of them? If so, what would you like to see? If not, why not? What keeps you from saying you'd like to see them on TV right now? So where are you kind of at on all that?
Well, first off, I would be doing a happy dance if either one of them went to a live-action television show. Just because I think, TV nowadays has the budget and just the effects and the look, the feel is the same on the small screen as it is on the big screen. I think the TV shows now can look as cool as they look on the big screen. Now, there is a little bit more that goes into a major motion picture, their development and whatnot. But the character growth that you get on a TV show just completely, really just overdoes anything that you can get from a movie. But the problem with that is you got to make sure you have that same level of commitment on the TV show that you get in the movies. You got to make sure you have that same, just that, especially like you're thinking Star Trek universe. You have to have that, the commitment to the Star Trek universe, to these characters, to their growth and their development that you're getting in these movies. And that's where I would always have a little bit of leeriness, but in my head, if they do it right, a TV show would be awesome. And this is either one. A TV show would be awesome, but you gotta watch, especially on the Star Trek side, because they've done so well with the movies that, we've got this going out there. People will be leery of jumping on another TV show. Where's it going to go? Who's it going to be? Is it going to be the same actors we're seeing on the big screen? Well, it's not. Okay, who's chasing who? Where's the replacements? What's going on there? And you got to kind of, finagle it. Me, personally, I would love to see live action.
I'd like to see them follow the model that's worked so well for shows like Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, things like that. Maybe not necessarily going for the 20-something episode season, but, going to these networks, the cable networks, and doing these shorter seasons, and Doctor Who, things like that. Shorter seasons where maybe they're 13-episode arcs. Really focus heavily on high-quality writing. Where you've got like these really big, every episode feels like big impact. Or look at shows like Arrow. I think Arrow is working really well right now because, again, the strong character development. So that's where you could do maybe a full season and do it something like that. To me, the writing has to be top-notch. You can't have filler episodes. You've got to start, and I'm not saying you can't do character-focused episodes. You can't have filler episodes. You've got to have episodes. Every episode has to feel like they're progressing something in the environment. I look back to Next Generation. There were episodes that gave us some great background into characters like Guinan, for example, that made me love the character even more. You got to do stuff like that. It's got to be top-notch, high-quality, cutting-edge writing that has people who would never touch the franchise before jumping on it because the buzz is that high. It's got to be like these geek shows that are out there right now. Walking Dead, to me, is, I think, a perfect example of how to get this right. Look at the buzz off of that zombie show. And to call it a zombie show in and of itself is kind of understating what it really, really is. But, you look at something like that, and I think that's a model. What they're doing with shows like Dexter, what they're doing for Mad Men. I know that these aren't all sci-fi shows, but what I mean is these are top-quality cable shows that people are talking about because the characters are engaging, wittily written, and every episode has a feeling of importance to the character development, to the viewer. You can't miss it. Star Trek and Star Wars, if they're going to go to the small screen, they've got to be able to compete with the writing of those shows and to have the acting talent that can bring that writing to life on the same caliber of the shows that we're mentioning now. And I think there's just a lot of immense talent in Hollywood that can do it. You just got to get all the right things in place. You have to have people who understand that kind of television, because I think that's the kind of television people demand now. And if you're going to compete in this market right now with the kind of television that's out there, you got to look towards not the main network shows. You got to look towards the cable shows. And they've got to be that kind of quality. I want to see them, though. I agree with you. I think they absolutely should do them. I don't have a preference as far as era that they do them in, other than the sense that I think you need to make the show accessible to diehard fans and the first-time viewer. But the winks and nods for all of us that have been there all along have got to be in place. But, you can do that subtly in a very well-written show that just, knocks your socks off. I want to see that. I want to see them go up against the cable shows.
Oh, definite.
Anything else about Star Trek or Star Wars that you want to... in our 1 hour show?
Yeah, in our 1 hour show, that's what, 2.5 hours now?
Yeah, I think we both knew that this one was going to be pretty witty.
Yeah, we knew this was going to go. And I think we've covered a lot of this, and we probably could keep going on another hour if we started really delving into stuff.
Yeah. And sorry to make a firm decision as far as Star Trek or Star Wars. I don't know that I can, because I don't feel that way about the two franchises. I've read a ton of really great debates between the two, and I think it's my respect level for both franchises. I really have a tough time deciding between the two, because I like them so much for very different reasons. I think they are that different.
And let me curb some hate mail I may get. When I say I am a Star Trek guy, I'm not pooping on the Star Wars universe. I like the Star Wars. I think it's a great universe. I said, okay, this is, if I got to pick the two, this is where I'm going to go with. This is my camp. So I'm not knocking anything that happens in Star Wars. Star Wars universe is a great universe. I enjoyed seeing it, but I have more of a connection, more of a passion and affinity towards the Star Trek universe. That it's, something that, I feel, more of a connect, and I think it's probably because there've been so much more medium for me that I've enjoyed watching. Next Generation, going on into DS9. Those two TV series back to back for me was just a large portion of my youth. That was, as I said, that was junior year of high school through college. I was sitting there and going every weekend, and when I was in college, I had a couple good friends. We used to watch Star Trek. We used to watch DS9. We used to have groups that would get together and say, oh yeah, and I still remember that Data episode. That was the two-parter where Data's head came off. I was in Bowling Green when that episode first aired, and the way Bowling Green, the TV station, did it, they had a Friday episode and a Saturday episode. Well, we all got together on a Saturday and watched it, and we all said, hey, we're not going to watch Friday, we'll watch it originally on Saturday together. Yeah. Well, I broke the rule, and I watched the Friday episode, so I knew it was going to happen. So we're sitting around getting ready to watch the episode. I'm like, dude, man, I heard a nasty rumor. Like, what? Brent Spiner, he wants to go back to doing Broadway, and he wants off the show. Like, what? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's just a rumor or if it's just something goofy. And so I'm watching the episode knowing what's going to happen. And I'm just, and when his head pops off, like, oh my God, it's true. Oh, and we're all freaking out. And I'm sitting there just laughing my head off because I completely threw him under the bus on that one.
Did you tell him?
Not until the following week.
Oh, that's really funny.
I let them go for a full week.
And the funny part about doing it then was you didn't have the internet like you have today.
Exactly.
So, it was, anything close to that was so in its infancy that, there wasn't the immediacy that we have today of being able to gather that information. That's really cool. I was working at Diamonds, and I was going to college too. And I remember my buddy Evan I would work with. We worked on Friday nights together. It was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. So, and where that's relevant is we were open till 9 o'clock on Friday night. Our store was dead. So we would sit there and we would talk about, people would come in as late as 6 o'clock. And then that was it, which made you wonder, why were we open, on Friday nights? Because with respect to the community, they were honoring their religious obligations. So they were not there. So the two of us would be there on Friday nights. And what would we do? you'd talk about things like DS9, I should say, and Babylon 5. That's where, like, when I was getting very passionate early about Babylon 5, we were fans of both shows. So, throwing out things like Bajor for the Bajorans and stuff like that. Past the time, we'd be doing one-liners from those programs and talking about our favorite moments because, our store was like dead. There was not, which when you had a commission element to your, finances isn't such a good thing. But being able to talk geek culture was, that was really, really fun during that time. And it was a good, like you're saying, a really good era of camaraderie that I don't remember growing up. I do think like the later years of high school into college was really my first sense of being a part of a fan community of sci-fi fans. It somehow started to become much more acceptable to say you liked Star Trek, to say you liked, Babylon 5, to say you were a Star Wars fan, comic books, because that was when things like Valiant and stuff, Vertigo and stuff like that started becoming popular. And later on, with Sandman and stuff. So it was a really interesting era for fans of geek culture to kind of be able to be part of the cool group, or as cool as you could get, I guess. I did feel like I was more acceptable because I knew something about this stuff. Like, people were interested in hearing you ramble on about it, which is always good for me because I tend to anyway.
No.
Yeah, I always did. I know, big shock, right? But I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this one. I was looking for something after we did the Raging Oscars because of our schedule on the regular podcast, we hadn't had a chance to do one of these in a while. So I felt like if we're going to do it, let's jump back to something that's really relevant today that a large part of our our listening audience, I should say, because nobody wants to see us, but a large part of our listening audience might be interested. And I hope anybody listening to this got as much enjoyment out of this as Jim and I did, because I've always wanted to talk about this stuff, Star Trek and Star Wars. Just like I always want to do a Doctor Who episode, or we're going to have to do one down the road at some point. I'd really love to do one on the show. But this episode in particular was one that I wanted to make sure we got to, because knowing your history, I knew this would be a fun discussion. And I learned a lot about you and your love for both of these series that I didn't know, because I knew the stuff from high school through college, and obviously for everything since we've been doing this podcast together. But some of the stuff from your childhood and your past before that, and where you started off with all these franchises, I didn't know. So that was really fun for me. It was always good, having a discussion with you about this kind of stuff.
Now I can get out of here.
Once again, sponsoring this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, this is your spot to do all of your Star Wars and Star Trek pre-ordering. Make sure to check out the Brian Wood series for Star Wars, and also make sure to go over to IDW and check out the amazing Star Trek ongoing series. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, and the cool part about both of these series is it's a chance to get new storytelling. It's set with the characters that we all know and love, that we've all grown up with. So it's a great opportunity to really enjoy these books with amazing creators. Also, I want to remind everyone they're a Comixology digital partner and an iVerse Media digital partner. Do all of your digital ordering right through DCBService.com. Please support these sites that support podcasts. They're what help keep us going. Over at InStockTrades.com. Remember, this is your place to pick up all of your Star Trek and Star Wars trades and hardcovers. And I mentioned the Star Trek Ongoing Trade Paperback Volume 4. This is a tale that I really loved. This is the one where it's the reimagining of that classic Mirror Universe storyline where we got the evil Kirk and the evil Spock. But it was a cool way to do it in this brand new universe with all of the changes that have happened in the most recent movie. This is, if you're excited for the summer as much as I am, this is a way to really kind of invest in this right now. It's $17.99 regularly, 30% off, only $12.59. It's a 104-page count book. They have a load of Star Wars and Star Trek related trades and hardcovers, omnibus volumes, and things like that over at InStockTrades.com. Do yourself a favor, head over to that website and see what they've got for you. If you're jonesing for a great way to read, especially if you're like, you know what, I'm reading a ton of comics right now, and to take on a single monthly series is really difficult for me, but I like reading trades and collected editions because I can grab a storyline I'm interested in, really delve into that. InStockTrades.com is really your source for that. Orders of $50 or more will give you free shipping. And once again, I want to thank both of those websites for supporting our podcast and so many others. We will see everyone next week.
Bye.
through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and flaws and incredibly clear sidelines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman. The villains are closing in, be they Thenengard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see.